The first thing we have on the agenda, we're going to have Executive Director Martha King to update us on a couple of board items.
Thanks, Derek. A few business logistical issues. We're live on the internet today. It's our first time live streaming. So in the future, you can see these meetings on our website, and there also will always still be a recording of the meeting on our YouTube channel. Another point of clarification, really, in March, H&H submitted a variance request regarding what types of staff may order seclusion, clinical seclusion. Health and Hospitals has rescinded that request. So the board is no longer looking at that issue right now, and H&H has told us they rescinded the request because they no longer think that is needed. The third point I want to make and remind everyone of is that the department's first semi-annual report, as required by the board's new standards on the elimination of sexual abuse and sexual harassment, is due on August 1st. The board then will subsequently address the implementation and compliance with the new standards at the September meeting. And finally, we won't be here in August. We don't have a meeting, so our next meeting is September 12th. Thanks.
Thanks, Martha. I just want to note and welcome Acting Commissioner Cynthia Brand. This is our first, welcome, Commissioner. This is our first meeting as Acting Commissioner. We look forward to the opportunity to work with you and your staff going forward on the new minimum standards relating to the elimination of sexual abuse and sexual harassment. And we look forward to working with you collaboratively as new issues come up. So welcome. First item on the agenda is approve the minutes of the June 2017 meeting. Are there any corrections or edits, or if not, I'll have a motion. Is there a second? All in favor? I'll consider that an approval. Thank you. We have 7 variances today that I'm going to describe, and then we'll have some public comment on these variances. The first variance is to allow the department, in highly exceptional circumstances presenting safety and security concerns, to waive the requirement that a person be immediately reduced from punitive segregation for 7 days after he's been held in punitive segregation for 30 consecutive days. The second variance is to allow the department to house 19 to 21-year-olds with people aged 22 and older. Third variance is a variance to allow the department to house 18 to 21-year-olds in the ESH unit. Fourth, a variance to allow the department to provide young adults housed in secure units with a minimum lockout time of 10 hours per day and access to law library services by means of a law library kiosk and typewriters in a secure unit. The fifth variance is to allow Health and Hospitals psychiatrists to see and evaluate stable adult patients on psychotropic medication in general population at least every 28 days rather than every 14 days. The sixth variance is to allow H&H to use either IGRA or TST for tuberculosis screening, and to exempt from repeat screening those prisoners who have a documented negative test in the 6 months prior to their admission. And then the last variance is to allow Health and Hospitals to provide the Department of Correction with specific diagnoses related only to injuries sustained by prisoners while in correctional custody. The reporting of diagnoses unrelated to an injury remains prohibited. We will begin the various section of the meeting with a public comment. We ask that speakers limit their public comments during this period to the variance requests presented, and to limit them to 4 minutes. The board will have an additional public comment period on all other matters at the close of this meeting. The iPad on the stage will let you know how much time you have left, and given the tightness of and extensive nature of this agenda, we really ask you to limit your comments to 4 minutes. How do I do this now? We have the comment. Yeah. So the first speaker, Sarah Kerr.
Good Good morning. My name is Sarah Kerr. I'm an attorney with the Prisoners' Rights Project of the Legal Aid Society. The Legal Aid Society opposes the grant of all of the proposed DOC variances. Permitting restrictions through variance is a disservice to the individuals housed in the jails. It creates uncertainty. There are no consistent rules, no consistent message from staff, and no certainty of what will happen to them. We object to the grant of the ESH variances that continue to house young adults in punitive, restrictive settings of ESH for extended periods of time. The continued commingling with adults reflects a failure to provide effective youth services, and we would believe restricts participation in education for those who must, to attend school, be taken to an area where they're chained by their feet to restraint desks regardless of their security status. Let's be clear that ESH is a punitive setting. The constant presence of emergency services unit, the daily canine dog use, the restriction to booth, no contact visits, desks where all out-of-cell time is spent chained by one's feet in the entry unit and in phase 1 of the ESH, and the use of those same restraint desks for all young persons attending school regardless of the phase they have reached are punitive measures. Lockout time is regularly less than the required 7 hours per day, and the ESH units are frequently subject to repeated lockdowns that terminate all movement and all out-of-cell time. Such excessive punitive measures do not serve to reduce the culture of violence in the DOC, and the persistent assertion that these measures are not punitive serves to reinforce the perceived lack of fairness and justice in the DO system for those it affects. Individuals in the ESH, including young adults housed in the most restrictive settings and required to sit at restraint desks, consistently report that these restrictive measures are painful and humiliating. They induce anger and frustration and hopelessness in young people who have no expectation that they will be moved to a less restrictive phase or that there will be any fairness from DOC in the process. The lack of air conditioning during hot days, which will increase as summer progresses, is oppressive and dangerous under these conditions, where you cannot move about on your own, cannot take showers or access water and ice to stay cool. Individuals are refusing programming because of these harsh conditions and punitive measures. Without air conditioning, these individuals who refuse programming will be alone, locked in their dangerously hot cells. Individuals express that they cannot advance, yet are not provided with assistance in completing the assignments. This includes at least one young adult with noted and documented developmental disabilities who was not excluded from the ESH setting. Individuals report that DOC staff tell them that they will never advance beyond phase 1, that they will never get out of ESH, and from what they experience, they have no reason to think otherwise. There is a growing frustration level in a population of individuals who do not deal well with frustration and uncertainty. This is not a recipe for reduced violence, rehabilitation, education, or improved program participation. The DOC's long detailed report provides little useful information and little or no support for the continuance of the variance. No plans for improvement. DOC searches for a pattern in an admittedly small sample instead of reviewing the facts. Why do people regress? What is the influence of the conditions on the individuals housed in ESH? How does use of restraints and restrictions affect the condition of trauma survivors? Are these conditions conducive to rehabilitation, to reduction in violence, or will they perpetuate violence in a system with a long-standing culture of violence? The report contains no evidence of the usefulness of the restrictions for approving the ESH or for the secure unit. Its assertions about reduced violence contradict the increase in violence reported by the Nunez Monitor. The DOC report suggests the same poor results from the ESH that our interviews reflect. Few complete the phases. There is a lack of participation in programming. The majority remain in ESH until they are discharged from custody.
Your time is up.
Can I quickly address the other two parts? Secure does have air conditioning, but otherwise the conditions are equally oppressive and should be remedied. The variance should not be granted. The restraint desks should not be used. They are counter-therapeutic and counter-rehabilitative. And just briefly on the punitive segregation point, this variance gets granted repeatedly, and there are many ways for the department to limit safety and security concerns other than keeping people in solitary confinement for extended periods of time. The punitive segregation reports that the department puts out do not reflect what this variance has meant for individuals subject to the waiver. How many people are held in punitive segregation for more than 60 days in any 6-month period is not reported. The DOC should report on the duration of time out of punitive segregation with greater detail on the number of people who are in a cycle of release and return. This should include the cumulative length of time that they do not have a completed 7-day respite from punitive segregation. Thank you.
The next speaker is Liz Mayer.
Good morning. My name is Liz Mayers, and I'm a member of the Jails Action Coalition, aka JAC. According to the relevant minimum standard on enhanced supervision housing, quote, the primary objective of ESH is to protect the safety and security of inmates and facilities while promoting rehabilitation, good behavior, and the psychological and physical well-being of inmates. I will speak about the way in which desk restraints do not fit this description. In its fact sheet regarding the use of restraint desks in enhanced supervision housing, the Department of Correction claims that, quote, the use of restraint desks is a correctional best practice utilized as a custody management strategy for disruptive behavior. A best practice it may be for custody management, but a good practice it's not for anything else. The Alliance to Prevent Restraint, Aversive Interventions, and Seclusion was established in 2004 by leading education, research, and advocacy organizations with a common goal: to eliminate the use of dangerous and dehumanizing practices as a means of managing challenging behavior. According to the Alliance, the use of these interventions, including mechanical restraints, has been demonstrated to result in emotional and physical trauma, serious injury, and even death. There is no evidence of the therapeutic or educational value of their use. They are practices that are neither ethical nor beneficial and often cause a spiraling effect in which additional unwanted behavior may arise. Further, there is an existing and growing body of evidence in support of positive alternatives in addressing challenging behaviors. That's a quote from the Alliance. In a statement supportive of the widespread effort to legislate against the use of restraints and seclusion in schools, Arnie Duncan, former Secretary of Education, stated that, quote, the use of restraint and seclusion can have very serious consequences. Furthermore, there continues to be no evidence that using restraint or seclusion is effective in reducing the occurrence of problem behavior. The use of restraints in jail and prison settings has also been questioned. In a 2011 Journal of Forensic Psychology Practice article titled The Ethics of Mechanical Restraints in Prisons and Jails, a preliminary inquiry about psychological jurisprudence, the authors state, although mechanical restraints are utilized daily in correctional facilities, mostly without fatal outcomes, the physical and mental harm stemming from their deployment is significant, thereby raising a number of ethical concerns, particularly when vulnerable prison populations are involved. An often overlooked effect they point to is that the routine practice of physical, psychological, and bodily confinement suggests the maintenance of penal conditions that are akin to those employed against historically oppressed and or controlled groups. For example, enslavement of African Americans, civil commitment of the mentally ill, internment of marginalized citizens. The requirement that education classes be offered in jail is certainly a good thing, but shackling students, which is what is being done to those who have agreed to pursue their education, is an oxymoronic idea. Figure out a way to unshackle their ankles as you work to unshackle their minds. Please do not approve any residence that forces people to get their education in shackles.
I'm sorry, if I could get your name again and your organization?
Liz Mayers, retired member of Jails Action Coalition.
Thank you.
Kelsey Diavolo? I'm getting that right here.
Good morning. My name is Kelsey Diavila. I'm a social worker at Brooklyn Defender Services. For today's comments, I'm just going to narrow it down to the secure unit. There should be a presumption of advance from phase to phase for anyone who has not had a new incident. It cannot solely be the ability to complete the phase. They are not providing sufficiently individualized plans, and someone who refuses but is not involved in another serious incident should advance. If not, then this is truly punishment. Reviews should include ability to change to a different phase before the time period is completed. It should be about current rehabilitative and security needs, not constrained by artificial, inflexible timeframes. If the secure unit is to be non-punitive as defined in the directive, then initial placements, subsequent placements, and placement reviews should all be informed by the principle that young people should be held in the least restrictive setting possible. There is no justifiable reason to constrain someone's progress on the basis of rigid timelines. Otherwise, the unit would be punitive in character. It's our position will continue to be that the restraint desks should not be used. Restraint desks are not and should never be designed for long-term use. They are humiliating and counter-therapeutic and counter-rehabilitative. The criteria for the use of the restraint desk is exceptionally broad. Assault is not further conditioned or qualified. Does any assault constitute for someone to be in the restraint desk? It's also our position that health and hospitals must be able to override any placement into secure and not just provide consultation. Again, it's also our position that clinical staff should not use rounding as the only method of monitoring individuals' conditions. There must be more, and there must be available confidential clinical space to see a person individually. This should be in the directive and also in the minimum standards. And lastly, council should be notified of placement, failure to advance, and transfer to another unit. For any individual, incarcerated individual, they should have the ability for them and their counsel to participate in the process, including weekly meetings, placement reviews, and behavioral assessments. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Parrish?
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Parrish. I'm the Director of Criminal Justice Advocacy at the Urban Justice Center Mental Health Project and a member of the Jails Action Coalition. I oppose the continuation of DOC variances to the standards regarding punitive segregation, commingling young adults with people over 22, particularly in ESH, permitting young adults to be placed in ESH, and allowing reduced lockout time in the secure unit so long as restraint desks are used there. When this board adopted rules excluding young adults from ESH, it relied on evidence that young people are different from adults and are vulnerable to greater harms in restrictive environments. The current inclusion of young people in ESH does not take that reality into account. The treatment of young people in ESH is even more restrictive than that of adults. Young adults are the only ones subjected to the entry unit and required to start in level 1 or 2, while adults can be housed in any of the 4 levels upon placement in ESH is adjudicated. Moreover, since the inclusion of young adults in ESH, restraint desks are used in both ESH entry and level 1. resulting in young adults either isolated in their cells or their movement restricted while shackled in restraint desks for the entirety of their time out of cell. Significantly, there have been no changes to ESH model to address the specific needs of young people. What's more, none of the programming in ESH is individually tailored to the needs of young people placed there. The DOC evaluation of ESH states that 65% of young adults relegated to ESH were receiving mental health treatment upon admission to the unit. That is more than 1.5 times the number of people in DOC custody generally who receive mental health treatment. In fact, one individual was moved from CAPS, a unit specifically for people with serious mental illness, to ESH, a case that this board should investigate. Despite the significant number of people with mental illness in these units, the programming they receive is in no way tailored to address their mental health concerns. Many young people also have histories of trauma prior to incarceration, but DOC has taken no steps to ensure that trauma-informed practices are used in these units, or that the unit is conducive to people with traumatic brain injury, and we know that that's a significant number of young people. The need to individualize programming is not limited to addressing health and mental health concerns. It also includes other needs, such as differences in literacy. According to the board's adult ESH report, even DOC staff acknowledge that low literacy levels make it difficult for participants to complete the journaling program, which is required for advancement of young adults in ESH levels as well. DOC's evaluation of ESH for young adults does not support continuation of inclusion of young adults in this restrictive environment. It does not include actual useful information regarding programming and participation. In fact, DOC acknowledges extensive hindrances to a full-scale evaluation because it does not collect the data needed. It also documents an apparent violation of the minimum standards as a young adult who turned 22 during ESH stay was transferred to punitive segregation, which appears to violate minimum standard 1.17b3, which says that when people's status changes due to age or health, they shall not be placed in punitive segregation. The DOC touts
Your time
its
is up, Ms.
advancement.
Parrish.
I just have one last paragraph, sorry. The DOC touts its advancement to reduce its use of punitive segregation. They note that the punitive segregation population is now 2% of all incarcerated people, yet 4% are placed in alternatives units. The board is responsible for ensuring that the conditions in ESH actually remedy the problems with punitive segregation and don't impose harms that are equivalent. The board must consider the amount of isolation in ESH as well as the effect of restraints. ESH is merely a punitive alternative to punitive segregation and does not provide age-appropriate services to address the needs of this population. I urge you to deny the requested variances from the Department of Corrections. Thank you.
Elizabeth Willowson. Did I say that right? Wallace. Okay. I'll get it next month.
Good morning. My name is Lizzie Wallazin. I'm a paralegal with the Prisoners' Rights Project of the Legal Aid Society. Over the past few months, our office has been speaking with over 30 individuals incarcerated in enhanced supervision housing, ESH. I wanted to share excerpts of statements from 6 people who we've spoken to most recently, all of whom have agreed to share their statements publicly. Most of the people that I quote are under 21 years of age, but everyone we've spoken to, all 30-plus individuals, have reported a lack of services, inconsistent policies, and the punitive nature of ESH. I think it's important that you hear their words and remember that these are people who require the board to maintain appropriate standards in our jails. Many of our clients complain about the long periods of lock-in that occur during ESH lockout schedule. I quote, "Our lockout hours alternated from 5 a.m. to 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. Due to the alternating nature of the lockout hours, I often spent 25 continuous hours from 12 p.m. one day to 1 p.m. the next in my cell. This extended period of time spent in my cell made me feel angry, and I sometimes also felt suicidal." Quote, "We receive 7 hours out of our cell each day, during which time our legs are shackled to desks in the day room. Lockout regularly occurs 2 hours later than it's supposed to. Almost every other day, we lock out of our cells at 4 p.m. instead of 2 p.m. and lock back in at 7. It's extremely frustrating to me that we are giving less lockout time when we lock out late. In the summer months, our office has been hearing increasingly that the temperatures in ESH are unbearably high. One client cited recorded temperatures of 85 and 95 degrees in the tiers. I quote, "ESH is extremely hot when the temperature rises. There's no air conditioning and no cold water in the showers. We're allowed to shower only during our lockout time. Staff do not provide us with ice when it's hot. During the heat wave in June 2017, it was unbelievably hot. There is one fan, but it's not sufficient to cool the housing area." Our clients often complain about the lack of legitimate due process in their review process. I quote, "My second 45-day review was in June of 2017. I made a serious effort to keep peace in the housing area and prevent any altercations that could warrant a failure to advance. I completed all of my programming and received certifications in both anger management and behavior management. However, I failed to advance in my 45-day review, despite fulfilling all of the criteria for advancement. I believe that I failed to advance because reports I made to Chief Jennings about the quality of life in ESH a few days prior to my advancement hearing. After I failed to advance in June, I gave up hope of ever advancing to level 2. I do not believe that my completing the programming has any influence on advancing through the ESH levels." Another quote, "In the end of April 2017, I participated in a hearing regarding my ESH placement. At the hearing, I was told that a review would be conducted 45 days later, but nothing happened. I've not received any other review or any information regarding my ESH Phase 1 placement." During lockout, our clients are shackled to restraint desks, ostensibly for their own safety. However, in addition to feeling robbed of their agency and humanity, individuals report feeling vulnerable to attack and unable to defend themselves should someone get free. I quote, "In ESH Level 1, the use of restraint desks is the worst part. When we are in the desk, we cannot do anything on our own. Sometimes we have to ask correction staff for everything, including going to the bathroom. Sometimes it takes an hour or more for them to respond to our requests. It's made worse because the leg and arm shackles are excessively tight." Quote, "During lockout, I was shackled by my ankles and restrained to a desk. My legs hurt and I had cuts and calluses on my ankles from their restraints. The inability to stand up or stretch my legs also caused me pain. All I could do while in the day room was watch TV and talk to others. I often felt unsafe. I was unable to protect myself while restrained. I felt sad and depressed while restrained and was often agitated very easily." Quote, "In general, I'm not doing well in ESH. I recently pled guilty to one of my jail cases last month because I'm tired of being cuffed to a chair. I do not think that anyone can help me feel better as long as I'm in Phase 1. Our clients report that correctional staff rely heavily on militarized units, including ESU, K-9 units, and probe team. And I'll close with the powerful words of our clients about ESH's detrimental impact on their mental health. I quote, "ESH has made me incredibly angry and anxious. When I was in general population, I did not feel this way. In ESH, I have so little control over my life that I lose control. Nothing is consistent, and there's no hope for gaining incentives or improving the situation. It's humiliating and hopeless to be housed in ESH. Phase 1 of ESH is the worst housing area I have ever been in. I would rather be housed in West Facility, even though I hated the isolation there. ESH makes me angry and makes me feel more aggressive. I have no rights here, and the staff lock me into the cell whenever they feel like it. It's extremely violent. Lots of people are getting cut. Thank you very much for your time."
Al Craig?
Good morning. I really want to talk to you people, right? You read these letters, which I hope these inmates aren't suffering, but I never hear you read letters from cutting victims, victims of inmate assaults. You never talk about those inmates who are cut by these inmates, who are beat by these inmates, who are assaulted by these inmates. Not once have I heard in over 3 years or 4 years I've been coming to these meetings, have I heard any advocate for the inmate who's getting slashed, right? So, I mean, like, we, as COBA, surprisingly, are the ones who come up here every month and talk about those inmates. And, I mean, I know you don't want to hear it, because it doesn't speak to your agenda about these programs. That bothers me. And what else bothers me, are you reporters Or are you trying to really come up with solutions? Young people, listen, you have a responsibility not just to follow, but eventually one day be leaders. Stop listening to a bunch of people who come here and shoot rhetoric at you, or as we call in hood, game, and have you believe that this is only a one-sided argument. Our job is to protect these inmates. I mean, nobody wants to cuff an inmate to a chair or a desk. Nobody wants to. Believe me, it's a hard thing to do, to get them to comply, all of these things. But what about, did you ever wonder why they never get you up here to talk about those victims of the slashing, the gang assaults, when they get, why they never get you up there to talk about this? If you really want to make a change, because remember, one day you're going to be leaders. One day you're going to be the one who makes the decisions. One day you're going to be sitting up here, right? You're going to be standing up here, some of you sitting in these seats. And you're going to have to make these decisions. Stop letting old rhetoric shape your mind and blind you. That's who I'm speaking to. These variances that they have, please, we got to do something. Nobody wants to lock these guys into no desk. But when they're cutting people like crazy, we got to do something. Come up with some solutions. I know you don't want to hear it. It don't speak to your agenda, and yada, yada, yada. I know. Is my 4 minutes up late yet?
No, I'll let you know.
I got a few more. Yeah, because it gets kind of ridiculous that we sit here all the time and we keep going through this over and over again. Rah, rah, you know. I'm like, what are we doing here? Are we really trying to make a difference? You know, young people in jail call people my age, who's 50, they call us old heads, right? And I'm speaking directly to you young people, right? Stop letting the old heads tell you what to do. Think, ask your questions. That's what they teach you in college, right? Ask questions, find out information, seek out truth. That's what the news reporter is supposed to do. That's what youth does. When you become old, you become jaded, you start thinking that you know everything, right? You only see one point of view. While your eyes are wide open, learn. This is a lesson to you, because old people generally, like myself, don't really want to change. So change. That's the only way this thing gets better. Ask the questions. What can we do to stop people from cutting and slashing? That's what you do. The rest of the people, they'll be finished soon. They'll be retired.
Time's
like
up,
me.
Mr. Craig.
Okay. I'll be back later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alex Abel.
Good morning. I'm Alex Abel with the Urban Justice Center and the Jails Action Coalition. I'm speaking specifically today, I spoke about it last time as well, but about the variance for ESH for young adults. And I don't want to repeat myself here, but one of the things that I spoke about last time was transparency in the process by which people are placed in the housing unit and by which they level out of it and by which people are replaced in the housing unit later on potentially. And I wanted to speak about that especially in light of the recent the DOC report on enhanced supervision. And I wanted to draw especially special attention to the demographics that make up the young adult housing area in relation to the overall population of the jail, especially regarding race. For example, the overall DOC population for Latino inmates is 33%, while in the young adult supervision housing, it's 44%. For white people, white young adults, 7% overall for the department at large, and 0% for the young adult ESH housing. Now, that's like it's kind of a crude way of looking at it. There are other factors involved that we have to think about here. But because there's no transparency in the process by which people are placed in these housing units, we have to worry about what kind of discrimination and what kind of racism and other forms of discrimination is taking place when we're moving people into these housing units. We know, for example, that institutions in general reflect the racism of society, and especially the criminal justice system reflects the racism of society. And furthermore, we know that bias takes place in the mind of the individual, of the people in power making these decisions within the department. And we know that, like, basically, the more things that take place in people's minds, the more decisions that are made in people's minds and not on paper, The more of these things that are not put on paper, the more opportunity for bias there is, and the more we have to worry about why is it such a disproportionate amount of people based on race in these housing units. And so that's my concern here right now. But I just want to comment on what the gentleman who just spoke before me just said, and that's about safety and that advocates don't come up here talking about, the people who are actually getting cut. And I just want to remind people that our clients are the people who are not doing anything and just serving out their time. Our clients are the people who are potentially cutting people, and our clients are the people who are getting cut themselves. Last week I was out there at Rikers Island seeing someone with a massive scar down their face. We don't want people to get cut. That's why we're talking about this. The idea that safety is not related to transparency or that safety is not related to the process within these housing units is naive. And it's the same way we've been doing things for years, putting people into a box and not thinking about what is the underlying cause for violence. And so I'm an advocate here. We're talking about the people getting cut. We don't want people to get cut. We don't want bloodshed. Let's think about a new way of doing things, not going back to the old way, which is what COBA is basically advocating for in general, and what these desks are, what this secure housing unit, what ESH is in general as well. Thank you.
Catherine Frizzle.
Good morning. I'm a member of the Jails Action Coalition and a staff attorney at Children's Rights, a national nonprofit that advocates for children nationwide. Since 1995, Children's Rights has served as a national watchdog organization fighting to protect and defend the rights of young people, because we believe that all children and young people have the right to the best possible futures. We ask the board today to discontinue ESH for young adults ages 18 to 21. In the alternative, if the variance is approved today, we ask the board to impose conditions on the variance to ensure the safety and rehabilitation of the young adults in ESH. ESH is supposed to be a regular, non-punitive housing area. Its aim is rehabilitation, yet the lack of clarity around the procedural due process protections suggests that the housing unit is in fact punitive and operating in violation of young adults' procedural due process rights. While Children's Rights has not had one-on-one contact with the young adults held in ESH at this time, we are aware that at least one person was told by an area captain to pack up because he was signed up for a program, which is not a program at all, called Enhanced Supervision Housing. This is true. This does not meet the due process requirement of the opportunity to be heard at a meaningful time and in a meaningful manner. It is also entirely unclear whether young adults in ESH are enjoying sufficient status review while in ESH. At least one person in ESH claimed to have completed all of the program requirements, yet was in ESH for a year, and according to him, had not enjoyed a status review during that time. Finally, we are concerned about the quality of the adjudication hearings and placement reviews when they do take place. There's no qualitative data in the DOC report regarding how young adults feel when they are afforded an opportunity to be heard, if in fact that is happening. As stated by Emily Turner of the BOC in May, young adults are more likely to comply with corrections when they feel as though the process has been fair. The fact that young adults do not have advocates within ESH representing them during hearings calls into question whether their procedural due process rights are being protected. If the variance is approved today, we ask that the board mandate that the DOC reports the following information forthwith. Whether all young adults are given written notice of ESH placement determination within 24 hours of placement, whether the adjudication hearing is conducted within 3 business days of service of notice on a young adult's placement in ESH, whether the hearing officers include DOC staff involved in implicating the young adults, and whether written notice was provided to the young adults outlining the basis for determination. To echo my colleagues of the Jails Action Coalition, fairness equals safety, and if the board imposes those requirements and conditions when approving this variance, which we are objecting to, we believe that it will go a long way in furthering the fairness and safety within the ESH unit. Thank you.
Maya Brown.
Hi, I'm Maya Brown. I'm a paralegal with Children's Rights. So today, we ask the board to discontinue ESH for young adults ages 18 to 21. In the alternative, if the variance is approved today, we ask the board to impose conditions on the variance to ensure the safety and rehabilitation of the young adults in ESH. According to the DOC, ESH is a progressive and safe management approach designed to promote progress through rehabilitation. DOC policy mandates that young adults are to earn additional privileges at the end of each ESH level. We are now asking that the board align DOC practices with the ESH's stated policy. First, we ask the board to clarify how young adults move between ESH levels. The length of stay on ESH for young adults in level 3 is over 94 days. There are no reported young adults in level 4. The DOC report mentions no input from the young adults housed in ESH. But in May, Emily Turner provided testimony that the young adults experienced confusion about why restrictions were being imposed and what they needed to do to comply with ESH. Ms. Turner also articulated the need for clear goal setting with young adults participation in the rule process, and the need for further explanation to individuals about why they have not been moved to a less restrictive setting. Yet there remains ambiguity and uncertainty about how a young adult can progress through ESH to a less restrictive setting. We ask the board to mandate that as a condition to the variance, if approved, that the DOC report what efforts, if any, DOC staff has taken to educate the young adults on how they can progress on an individual basis. The DOC should report as to whether this guidance was provided to inmates in their native language and taking any learning differences into account. Second, we ask the board to disallow the use of restraint desks for ESH 3 and 4 on young adults who choose to attend school. This would provide positive incentives to young adults in levels 1 and 2. The DOC reports indicate that only 27 young adults in ESH are involved with schooling. The DOC has indicated at prior meetings that even among the young adults who attend school, their attendance is infrequent. In fact, the DOC indicates that there aren't enough young adults attending school to warrant a second DOE class. Permitting the 11 young adults in level 3 to attend school without the use of restraint desks will provide incentives for young adults to attend school and to progress. The 11 young adults currently in level 3 are not restrained outside of school, and they have spent an average of 3 months in ESH. The DOC has implied that because young adults in level 3 and 4 attend school with young adults in level 1 and 2, all students must be held in restraint desks. They cite no studies showing that this increases safety, advances learning, or enhances rehabilitation. There is a paucity of data supporting the effectiveness of restraints to improve behavior in school settings. In fact, some studies indicate that restraints and forms of seclusion contribute to unsafe environments. Holding young adults at restraint desks serves no stated rehabilitative or educational purpose. For these reasons, we ask the board to discontinue the use of restraint desks in level 3 and 4 in school as a condition of the variance if it is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we come to the variances. Yeah, sure.
Two things that I just wanted to say. I did want to make a full disclosure that I was recently elected to the board of directors of the Children's Rights Organization. We've heard from 2 people here today. I do want to say, as a family court judge, I presided over child abuse and neglect and foster care cases, and children's rights is most widely known, and the bulk of its work is focused on advocating and litigating for systemic reform in the child welfare and the foster care systems. I have discussed this with Conflict of Interest Board, Wayne Holly, the attorney. I have not, and I will not in any way be discussing with the children's rights, either at the board or staff, any of their positions with respect to the Board of Corrections, correctional matters, even any juvenile justice matters. So I wanted you all aware of that. Secondly, there have been a lot of really excellent comments made here today. The variance did not come out until Friday. We did not get the benefit of receiving most of this in writing. So I would ask, I think you all know we're in the midst of rulemaking regarding restrictive housing. We would find it very beneficial, to the extent you have the time, to reduce your comments here today in writing and to submit them to the committee, so we can continue to consider those, not just with respect to the variance here today, but as we move forward with rulemaking. Thank you.
I second that second point you made. Very important to put that on the record, and we will consider it. Okay, variance number 1. This has to do with a 7-day waiver. A little background, and then we'll ask the department to present its variance. September 8th, 2015, the board first granted a variance from minimum standard 1-17D2 to allow the department, in highly exceptional circumstances presenting safety and security concerns, to waive the requirement that a person be immediately released from punitive segregation for 7 days after that person has been in punitive segregation for 30 consecutive days. The board last renewed this variance on January 10th, 2017. This variance expired yesterday. Since September 2015, the department has used this variance sparingly. The chief of department has granted 22 waivers and denied 8 requests for waivers. No one individual has received more than 1 waiver. Since the board last granted the variance in January 2017, the chief has granted 4 waivers and denied 1 request. Board staff have published an analysis of the 30-day waiver request on our website. The department has now asked the board consider a 6-month renewal of this variance. They have additionally requested that the board amend the minimum standards to incorporate this variance on a permanent basis. We will vote on the variance request today, and we will review the minimum standards in our ongoing restrictive housing rulemaking process. Would ask the department to please present both its variance request and its report to the board on the efforts to reform punitive segregation and to create therapeutic alternatives. This report was required by the board's January 2017 variance. The board will then have an opportunity to discuss the proposed conditions on the variance prior to a vote. Yep.
Morning, everybody. Thank you very much. I think as a preview for all the 4 variances that we're requesting, I think that the department speaks, I speak for everyone at the department, we're committed to the rulemaking. I think that we have legitimately tried under the past couple of years to make some dramatic reforms across the department to reduce the use of punitive segregation, to develop alternatives to punitive segregation, to develop alternative programs in general to better inform, engage, and hopefully contribute to the lives of the individuals who are in our care. It's been a long kind of effort for us. We have not always been perfect. We have tried to gain insight from other jurisdictions, particularly when it came to our adolescents and young adults. We are working hard to kind of focus on some of the more problematic and violent of our population, but also focus on working with other agencies like an H&H on our seriously mental ill, and hopefully working on those with lower mental illness issues with the creation of alternatives to CAPS and PACE, other things that have been productive. I mention all that because I think it's worth stating before we go to these variances that we know constantly that we are trying to reform some of our efforts to kind of learn from our past mistakes. Some of these variances come up because we put into practice certain things. We need to figure out that parts of it don't work, and we revise them. A very, 7-day and the commingling are 2 things where we've learned lessons where maybe we couldn't have gone as far as we did as fast. We'll want to take the time during rulemaking to really have long discussions about that with the board and with other people, show you what we've seen, but also be open to kind of hearing. We're constantly taking a look at other jurisdictions as well. As a reminder, obviously we've had some dramatic returns. We've obviously reduced the population in our punitive seg, 23-hour lock-in, from over 600 to about 110. And then the populations in our alternatives to punitive seg, and while people do say that they are restrictive, they are less restrictive than punitive seg. They are restrictive in some manner, but we are trying to focus them on rehabilitative efforts. They are not meant to be punitive. We are trying to move away from that by building a proper continuum. We do have less than 2% of the population in ESH and only 34 that are young adult in that, and it's not broken out where they're all in one area with restraint desk access. Only 7 are in ESH entry level. 8 are in ESH level 1, and the rest are in level 2 or level 3, which do not have the use of restraint desks. We use them sparingly unless they go to school. They choose a school. That's right. That's fair enough. If they are, and to be clear, we do have kind of logistical issues with school and kind of mixing and matching. So in order to kind of participate, we want to make sure that we maintain safety. So as we go through all of these variance requests, we did do a study of kind of where we are in terms of alternatives to punitive SEG. I think that we have shown great progress by enhancing and advancing the number of alternatives to punitive SEG that we have available, not just expanding the number of PACE and CAPS to work with our severely mentally ill, but also expanding the levels within ESH to recognize the progression of individuals from kind of their first placement in ESH through different areas that offer not just flexibility in lockout times, but also commissary and other programs. We have worked extensively on the adolescent and young adult population, creating Second Chance, True, Secure, and progressively lowering the number that actually go into those units over time as well to really focus in on the population. Even here today, as we talk about the secure variants, we'll be talking about some of the changes to the criteria because of the fact that we have built a better continuum. For all of these variances up front, we are asking for 6 months because we are hoping that we get to the rulemaking. We get to the conversation that actually makes solid and supple these, many of these changes so that we can not kind of have these periodic conversations, but really a fuller assessment of everything. So I don't want to go into too much detail because I know that there is a lot on our plate in terms of variances, but wanted to address that fact up front. So in that vein, we offer up our first variance, which is on the 7-day waiver. As the chair mentioned, we have used it very sparingly. We have, I believe, been very good with the documentation and justification for these, and we continue to use it sparingly as such, where if a person is kind of assaultive and causing slashing while in punitive SEG from a safety standpoint, we present that to the chief of staff and the chief of department. The chief of department makes that decision. We'll go one at a time, I assume so.
So before we have a discussion on this, I'd like to have a motion on this variance. A motion? Motion. For a second? Second. Okay, and does anyone have any comments or questions? I will say one thing. I had originally myself been an opponent of 6-month variances, essentially across the board. I thought it was too long a period of time, but having spent a lot of time thinking about this variance and others as well, I've come to feel that 6 months, while it sounds like a long time, it oftentimes is a necessary time period to allow the department to do the kind of research and do the kind of study and the kind of thoughtfulness that a lot of these require, and that many times 3 months, 4 months are just too rushed. So I make that comment to start, and then I invite anybody else on the board to please join in and express whatever views you'd like.
Just briefly, I'm going to vote against this variance. The department doesn't use it, they don't need it, and there are other options on in the department's housing areas to keep people for that 7-day period. So that's why I'm voting against it.
I agree with you, Derek. I think, variances, we shouldn't be using variances to sort of manage our way through this process. We ought to be using rulemaking to work through some of the issues that we're working through. And so doing a 6-month variance does allow the rulemaking committee an opportunity to take all these things up and to either codify them through our rules or not. And variances shouldn't be a way that we are coming back every 3 months or 2 months trying to manage through variances. We shouldn't be doing it. So if we can do 6 months, that'd be great.
And the one response I do feel compelled to say is that we are supposed to entertain the comments of interested parties, and I think it's fundamentally unfair to our community and our interested parties when they're not given adequate notice. You did give adequate notice of this one in the commingling. We didn't get the other variances until Friday, so therefore we're having to listen to oral comment and not have the written comment they would have done. So I would agree there's value in having it 6 months, provided there's really sufficient notice to the community so we can appreciate their comments.
Anyone else? Sorry. Anyone else with a comment here? Okay, then I think we're ready to have a vote on this. I'm going to ask each person individually to vote.
I'm going to read one existing condition.
Oh, okay, sorry, go ahead.
The one existing condition on this variance is that during the pendency of this variance, the chief of department shall approve all waivers in writing and state why placement in a less restrictive setting is not an option, not a safe option. The chief must specify her reason for granting or denying the request. Immediately after the chief's decision is made on a request, the department shall send to the board the request and the chief's decision. That's an existing condition.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Safier? We're going to take a vote on it now. So the way we've been doing this in the past is to have a roll call and each person vote individually.
Supported.
Yep. Mr. Richards?
In favor?
Judge Hamel?
In favor.
Dr. Cohen?
No.
Dr. Bryant?
In favor.
Ms. Jones-Austin? In favor. And I vote in favor of it as well. So the variance passes. 6 votes and one opposed. Okay. Now we have the second variance, which has to do with young adult commingling. On September 8th, 2015, the board first granted a variance from minimum standard 1-02C1 to allow the department to house 19 to 21-year-olds with people 22-year-olds and older. The board last renewed this variance on January 13th, 2016, to expire on July 13, 2017. The minimum standard was intended to reduce violence by segregating developmentally distinct age groups, provide age-appropriate rehabilitative opportunities, and to conform the board's minimum standards with the requirements of New York State law and PREA. In September 2005, the department requested a variance in order to make more time before housing all young adults together at GMDC. After an uptick in violence at GMDC, the department began to change its thinking and is no longer pursuing compliance with the minimum standard. While all 18-year-olds are in young adult-only housing areas, around 70% of 19 to 21-year-olds are currently housed in housing units with adults. The department has now asked the board to consider a 6-month renewal of the variance, allowing for the commingling of 19 to 21-year-olds with adults. They've additionally requested that the board amend the minimum standards to incorporate this variance on a permanent basis. We will vote on the variance request today and review amendments via rulemaking process in the future. Jeff?
Thank you again. I think for this one, I think I've been relatively clear with the board. Our intent is, in fact, to kind of house a majority of the young adults in a facility, regardless of what that facility, with appropriate programming space and young adult-specific programming. We do have, just from a number standpoint right now, an issue with just kind of the sewer and fire safety kind of maintenance that has to happen within GMDC, the current facility that is focused on the young adults. So that has resulted in less than 50% of the young adults in that facility at this point. There are around 500 down units and 15 down beds, and 15 whole units that are offline right now in GMDC. We are working as fast as we can to kind of upgrade and fix and make sure the maintenance is completed. And on a secondary note, we also have noticed that, as the chair said, we had significant issues when we tried to kind of put a majority of the young adult population into one facility. While over time, the staff have adjusted, the programming staff have adjusted, and so has the department in terms of managing the young adults together. There have been some benefits to kind of moving those young adults who do not want to participate in programming, who are otherwise more violent, to other areas where there is a calming effect, something that was noted within the Federal Monitor's report as well. Overall, we have seen reductions in violence within the young adult population, particularly over the last year. In the recent months, GMDC particularly has had declines, not just in terms of the number of population, but per capita going down as well. And the violence rates within commingled housings are generally lower. And as you increase the percentage of full young adult housing, that level of violence usually gets higher, as we've noted in our studies. So we'll continue to work on that, but wanted to share, at least with the board, the commitment that we were not going to keep a low number, but for the fact that we have facility issues right now we will try to get a majority of young adults, with no number, but just in terms of a majority in non-commingled houses where there are available programming and programming space.
Yeah, sure. Judge Owen.
I have some questions, but I also want to make some comments so that everybody understands the history. The standards currently require that the 18 to 21-year-olds be commingled among themselves.
Yes.
It's a new cohort that the board had created as a result of Commissioner Pont wanting to treat the 18 to 21-year-olds as uniquely distinct based on the neuroscience and other needs of developing bodies and brains. It also arose as a result of PREA, because our standards had been the cohort was 16 to 18, and then 19 was just adult. When PREA came down, it was adopted by the state, which was in conflict with our standards. We therefore had to modify our standards. Commissioner Pont was here, and Commissioner Pont led the charge to create a new cohort of 18 to 21. It has never been accomplished, the commingling. So what the variance is to continue to let them not comply with the standards. It's not really to allow commingling with the adults, it's to not require them to commingle in a cohort. Now, the 18-year-olds were a particular issue, and I just want to focus on this a little bit today, because I think it's part of the issue with secure and with young adult enhanced supervision. The 18-year-olds, for a period of time, got caught up in the middle, and they had to be separated because we didn't have the 18 to 21, and Commissioner Pont was concerned that the 18-year-olds might be subjected to violence being placed. So we kept the 18-year-olds separated. I think Bobby may have been the only person on the board at the time. There was a lot of violence with just the 18-year-olds, which is why there was work to get the 18 to 21-year-olds together as much as possible. You all really received remarkable, I thought accomplished remarkable success at about 70%. And then there was one really bad incident, and it was a really bad incident. But the commissioner and DOC had conceded that there was some mismanagement. There had been a lot of new officers, they hadn't been properly trained, they didn't know de-escalation, they weren't trained to work with young people, and there was this horrific incident. And then all of a sudden, we started dialing back this idea of commingling it. Now we also, I noticed when you're asking for the variance, you're not asking to include 18-year-olds. And from our standards, we don't treat 18-year-olds any differently than 19 to 21-year-olds. That's what Commissioner Pont wanted. And also, if you look at the monitor's report in terms of the violence, the young inmates and the 18-year-olds in particular have seen a lot of violence among them. So in my opinion, it's important to get the 18-year-olds commingled with the 19 to 21-year-olds where it's appropriate. My first question is, why are you not asking for the variance from the requirement of commingling for the 18-year-olds? Because there's nothing in our standards that would preclude you from asking for it and being granted it. We only granted you what you asked for, but why are you not asking for the 18-year-olds?
I'll let Lynette start, but I mean,
So, good morning.
Good morning.
I just wanted to comment on a few things. One is that although Commissioner Pont had looked at commingling 18 to 21-year-olds, it's important to note that this was done based on the fact we were in the process of eliminating punitive SEG and in the process of creating a number of different historic changes within the department. So it's important to note that lessons learned along the way will be taken into consideration so that changes might need to be made, because this is the first time this is being done across the country. So I just want to say that although the impetus at the time was to commingle, we've learned lessons, and we've learned that in some cases we need to keep that number lower than what we initially planned. However, as our Chief of Staff mentioned, we do intend to increase the number of young people in GMDC, as we still see that as our primary hub. But one of the concerns that we have had as an agency, and I think that the board shares, is that we want to ensure that young people, regardless of where they're housed, will have access to education. Conversations have occurred between DOC and DOE, and we are underway in terms of having additional educational services at 3 of the major facilities where many of our other young people are. We're going to start off with one of the major facilities and then move into the other 2.
Okay, but Lynette, is it, or Deputy Commissioner Saunders, is it fair to say that one of the primary reasons you all are not asking for it on the 18-year-olds is because the Department of Justice investigation focused on 16 to 18, and the Nunez consent judgment has certain provisions applicable to the 18-year-olds that is not applicable to the 19 to 21-year-olds, and therefore logistically, it's easier for you all to comply with Nunez and collect the data and report if you try to separate out the 18-year-olds. Is that fair to say?
I don't think that that is the appropriate reason. I mean, that is the reason why we're doing that. In our opinion, is that 18-year-olds, we have actually taken an active stance in moving 18-year-olds from EMTC into GMDC so they have access to additional programming. But I don't think that is the,
So that's not one of the driving factors?
I don't believe so.
Because is it fair to say that right now, the 18-year-olds can only be in GMDC? In other words, they are treated differently than the rest of the young adult cohort. They can only be in GMDC, the True Shoe, Secure, and Young Adult Enhanced Supervision entry. They can't be in level 1 because you don't have one that could accommodate them in level 1 to 4. Is that correct?
So as you know, during our discussions that we've had with you and other members of the board, we do plan on opening up additional units to accommodate 18 to 21-year-olds.
Okay, so you don't want to combine the 18-year-olds with 22 and up, but it's okay to combine the 19-year-olds. In other words, you see a distinction between 18 and 19?
At this juncture, we're choosing to utilize, we're choosing to try to provide as much as we can to our 18-year-olds along with our 16 to 17-year-olds along that line.
Okay, so in terms of the blended units, at the last meetings I had with you all, it appeared, and tell me if it's changed, is that in the blended units outside of GMDC, you weren't just sending high classification, the more dangerous young adults, you were even sending low classification.
We're sending
to blend.
people who are not interested in school per se, and if they have, regardless of classification. So if you're not interested in school, we'd send you to a place where school is not available, but programming is available.
Brian, just to be clear, that is something that we did start to do, particularly as we started to lose bed space. And so we were trying to focus on a population that did want to participate. GMDC has a lot more programming space than a lot of other, GMDC has a lot more programming space than most other facilities. So as we kind of made those decisions, we did try to prioritize, and in full disclosure, we tried to prioritize those people who did want to participate in programming. If they didn't, then they were more likely to kind of move out to a commingle as we started to lose bed space.
Okay, and so how do you ensure that the correctional staff that's in these blended units are properly trained to work with young adults? Because I know there was special training you gave for the young adult and for GMDC in particular.
So as we move forward with commingling, because again, this was a pilot for us, as we move forward, we are including additional training. Well, we have plans to include additional training for our program counselors that are going to be in this area. However, as you can see, initially, Safe Crisis Management was something that was just given to people assigned to young people, but we've seen the benefits, and we've actually expanded those services to recruits across the facilities that they're going to be assigned to.
And it is, so less than 50% of 19 to 21-year-olds right now are in GMDC, which is certainly much less than Commissioner's Pond original goal
Yes.
of 70%. Once you get GMDC renovated, what is your current goal for how many young adults you'd like to see have access to that incredible space? All the programming, all the school, the Peace Center, which is not available to the
As
other young
many,
adults.
as many as we can get in there.
But do you have a goal in terms of the percentage you'd like to
Well,
see?
at that, well, I was going to say the same thing. I think at the time, because as we can see, the numbers are dropping on a daily basis, at this time, we're going to wait to see what those numbers look like and what the interests of the young people look like to determine what number needs to be in GMDC.
But I mean, this is a transient population.
It
So when
is.
you say what the interest is, individuals come and go.
Yes.
Would it be based on sort of the research in terms of, if what I understand City Hall's goal and your goal is because these are the best people of all those incarcerated that have the best shot at turning their life around. If we give them a lot of programming very specific to their needs, why would it necessarily matter who's housed there on any given day as to what their interest is in terms of your overall program?
So I can explain that in broad terms, but in broad terms is that it's very important that we give our young people an opportunity to operate as individuals, but also like teams. We don't want to put young people who are not interested in programming efforts to distract or to cause harm to those who are interested. You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments from the board? I think Executive Director King has a condition you want to read.
There is one existing condition on this variance that I'll read now. That is, during the pendency of this variance, the department shall provide the board with a monthly census showing in which housing units and jails 18 to 21-year-olds are housed. And the department shall continue to A, provide the board with a monthly progress report on its implementation of the young adult plan and implementation of alternatives to punitive segregation, i.e. second chance, true, and secure units. And B, provide its progress report for each month on the 10th business day of the following month.
And do we need to vote on that condition, or is it already part of the variance? So, we need to take a vote on that condition first, and anyone? Yeah, is there a second? Dr. Sapir? Manley?
Favor.
Judge Hamel? Dr. Cohen? Dr. Bryant?
Support.
Jones Austin? Okay, it passes. I vote in favor of it as well. Are there any other conditions anyone wants to suggest, or are there any other discussion on this variance before we take a vote on it? That last vote was just for the condition. No? Okay, we're ready to vote. Dr. Sapir?
Support.
Richards?
In favor.
Judge Hamel? In favor. Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
Dr. Bryant?
Support.
Jones Austin? In favor. I vote in favor of it. Variance carries. Okay, we're on the third variance. Sorry. This is vote on young adult ESH variance. On July 12, 2016, the board first granted variances for minimum standards 1-05B and 1-08F to allow the department to house 19 to 21-year-olds in the ESH housing unit. In October of 2016, the board granted a variance to allow the department to house 18-year-olds in ESH. The board last renewed these variances on February 14, 2017, and these variances expire on August 14, 2017. The department has now asked the board to consider a 6-month renewal of the variance, allowing for the placement of 18 to 21-year-olds in ESH. They have additionally requested that the board amend the minimum standards to incorporate this variance on a permanent basis. The department explains that the secure unit and the ESH have become the department's primary housing options for the management of young adults who have acted violently. We now will vote on the variance request here today, and we will review the minimum standards in our ongoing restrictive housing rulemaking process. Then we'll have the department present its analysis of ESH and its variance request. The analysis required by the board's February 2017 variance. The board appreciates the department's efforts to collect, assess, and publish data on its young adult ESH initiative, and the department's report and future department work will allow the board and the department to make better informed plans and decisions in this regard. After DOC presents its findings, the board's Deputy Executive Director for Research, Emily Turner, will present highlights from the board staff's assessment, which was published today. Board members are invited to discuss both of these. Someone, go ahead.
Just one clarification, the report has not yet been published. It will be published very shortly. The PowerPoint summarizing the research has been published, which Emily will use today, and the full report will be forthcoming shortly.
So we'll just take a motion and a second to have a vote on this variance, and then we can go on with the discussion. Is there a motion? Is there a second? Thank you. Any board member have any comments or questions or that they want to make on the on this variance or propose any conditions?
We're going to hear first from
them. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you all again. So this is specific to the ESH, but as we've noted in the past, we realized that in creating Secure, things did not work out as we had expected or wanted. I think Commissioner Pont in his last statement and maybe in some private meetings have said openly that while the physical structure that we created for Secure was envisioned in a very specific way, didn't turn out the way we wanted it, and it was not a perfect solution. What we've done, and to mix a little bit of the two variants, is to focus a bit more on changing the criteria for Secure and ensuring that we focus on kind of the most problematic and violent within the ESH setting. We have committed to working on developing a young adult only ESH level progression. We have the availability right now to open up one unit that's specific, but to get to the next one we'll need a little more time just from a physical space standpoint. We asked for this variance because we have noticed that with some of the more violent young adults, and again, I go back to the fact that these are very small numbers. We are working towards developing kind of appropriate approaches for this population, but of the 986, and that's a point-in-time number, young adults, only 34 are in ESH, and again, only 8, I think, are in entry level. I might be mixing my numbers a little bit, and 8 or 7 are in level 1. The rest are in level 2. So we've tried to be judicious as well on the placement. We have held firm to kind of our commitment to the criteria for those that are in immediate response to kind of violent acts, serious injuries, slashings, and stabbings, where we can still engage with the young adults within using programs and a support team that focuses on the issues that we can try to address as much as possible with the young adult population. Not sure if we presented in some of our meetings the young adult ESH. We have shown that while 31 students who are enrolled in school within ESH, only 9 previously had been enrolled in school when they were not in ESH, just from a look back on those individuals in school. And we have seen some demonstrated gains because they have at least participated in those schools. For those people, 56% of the students in ESH demonstrated meaningful gains in math, and 61% demonstrated meaningful gains in reading on the TABE exam. Furthermore, in terms of the violent aspect, as we have tried to note, while violence does concern us still within the young adult ESH areas, we still have issues with blades and other contraband, and the ability to kind of smuggle in previously keys for some of the restraint desks that allowed for young adults to attack other young adults. Overall, by removing some of these from the general population, we also have had gains in the violence numbers for the general population, for the young adults, at least impacting the safety and security of those young adults in other areas. We will work on this. We have continued to focus, and that's why we want to go into the rulemaking to talk a bit more about what the long-term kind of view of this. But early numbers on the violence standpoint are progressing maybe not necessarily specifically in ESH, but very much in kind of GMDC and in the other young adult population. I want to note something that will come up for the board, and I've said this in several meetings. It is true that we focused a lot of our study on something that we could focus on right away, which was on the reduction of violence and the safety and security aspect. We know we have to do a better job on assessing the impact of some of our programming for this population and whether or not we should change that up a bit. Furthermore, I know there have been a lot of questions. While this variance is not specifically on the restraint desk, it's worth addressing. We have noted that other jurisdictions, particularly Washington State, other jurisdictions use restraint desks for their most violent population as well. However, we know that we're pushing the envelope a bit by eliminating all punitive segregation for this population, whereas other populations still have administrative seg and punitive seg to kind of counter that. So we know that we are leveraging other jurisdictions and their studies on the use of these desks, which have at least shown some success, but we need to do our own research, and we will focus on doing that going forward.
Yeah.
Can we ask any questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. Am I correct that right now here today, there is only one young adult enhanced supervision unit, and that's solely for young adults, and that's the entry unit that has 7 hours out of cell in full restraint for 30 days for 18 to 21-year-olds for assessment. Is that correct? And that the 19 to 21-year-olds right now here today, if they are in that unit and leave that unit and continue in enhanced supervision, then they are in blended units. They are not just in a young adult enhanced supervision. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I want to ask you some questions about that unit. That's what you're calling as the entry unit. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the conditions of confinement in that unit include 7 hours out of cell, but in leg restraints unless they're permitted to go make a call or go for a visit. And that's for 30 days, and I believe you said that's for the purposes of an assessment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell us what an assessment is, what an assessment constitutes inside of this entry unit?
Sure. So I just want to clarify, the purposes of the restraint desks are for safety. So in terms of what the process of assessment has been, it includes, one, an intake where we discuss triggers, family supports, strengths, and really develop a profile on that young adult, and it's self-reported. Secondly, it includes an environmental assessment, which includes information and intel from CIB and what's happening in the unit in those 30 day, in that 30-day time frame. Third, it includes, just recently we added the juvenile relational inquiry tool, which is a tool that really talks about and mapping family supports for this unit, for these young people, so that we can determine who we can call on to help support this young person during this challenging time. It also includes a substance abuse screening in which we will refer young people who share they have an addiction issue to H&H. And it also includes a programming participation. So what is the rate of programming participation, which has been very high actually in the entry unit. We see anywhere between 81 to 85% of program participation for our young people.
Okay, and what do you do with the assessment thereafter? If it takes 30 days in this unit, what do you do with the information thereafter? In practice, how is
Sure.
it used?
So one, it's used to develop programming for the young person. Two, it's used to identify who we can call on to do family interventions for the young person. Three, it's used in our sessions with one-on-one sessions to help motivate our young people. And it is, I forgot one thing, I'm so sorry, in terms of the assessment. A TABE assessment is also done, which is the assessment that determines what level of education this person is at, so we could determine what type of curriculum that is offered by the Department of Education is going to be offered to this young person. I forgot, which is very important.
So is this individualized program and plan? Does this develop goals for the individual in the assessment unit?
So that's a broad question, but I'll say yes, because one is young people are trying to figure out, you know, what led them to the decisions that they made. It's a lot of, the programming focuses on decision-making, it focuses on coping skills. As you know, the dialectical behavior therapy is about providing people with life skills so that they can acquire and utilize to cope with some of the stresses they may have had and actually exhibited negative behavior instead of some of the coping skills that we're trying to teach.
Okay, and is this plan memorialized and shared with the staff as well as the young adult?
So there's a couple of things that's happening. One is young people in this particular unit have not gotten a copy of their assessment. One is because it contains a lot of confidential information. We go over it with the young people, but we find that sometimes the young people leave it hanging around and it has a lot of confidential information on it, so we don't let them keep it because we don't want that information to be out. Sometimes they share with us very personal things, and we do not want that to be shared amongst their peers or even amongst staff. We don't want it to be used in a way that can be harmful to our young people.
Okay, and so is it shared with staff?
It is not shared with uniform staff, no. It is program staff reviews it and then uses it to create programming, like I said, and to use to have discussions. We are now in discussions actually with H&H, who we had them review the intake and they thought it was very useful, and so we're in discussions on how we can utilize that so that they can support us in our efforts to provide programming and services to young people.
So specifically, my last question on this, how is this information used to make housing placement decisions thereafter for the young person?
It is only used for that initial recommendation on where this person should go, whether it be a level 1, whether it be level 2, whether it be secure.
Well, then why can't it just be done in level 1? I mean, what I'm really troubled about, I don't know I can support that you're in enhanced supervision. I am really troubled. When I first reviewed it and recommended it, I recommended it to my colleagues. There was no leg restraints being implemented at desk. There was no 7 hours of leg restraints in an entry unit. There certainly wasn't leg restraints for 30 days and then you move on to more leg restraints for 28 days. This seems downright barbaric. Why is it, everything you've just said, why is it that that can't be done in a regular level 1 entry, don't call it entry, a level 1 enhanced supervision unit?
We didn't consider that at this juncture. We can consider it.
So, I always thought, matter of fact, I only learned in my meeting with you a week ago that there wasn't a level 1 young adult enhanced supervision unit for 18 to 21-year-olds. I learned it was only this, and then they go on to be blended with adults in full restraint with what I'll never forget Commissioner Pott's words. Those are our most hardened prisoners that he didn't want to mix them with. But that's the alternative. So when we give you young adult enhanced supervision, what we're doing is mixing these young people, other than 18-year-olds, with the most hardened prisoners that we have there.
So it's on.
Really, you could end
So
it
it's.
and call it a level 1.
So it's unfortunate, but if you take a look at the young people that we have in this unit, their crimes are comparable to the adults that are in the blended units as well.
But what this does is the way you got it set up right now, you essentially give them only 7 hours out a day for nearly 2 months in full restraint. That's punishment, plain and simple.
If they do not progress to level 2 or secure.
But are we not, because I thought we were gonna sort of,
So-
I don't know whether we was gonna do it as a sort of condition or modify the request to state that young people, after the assessment, that they would automatically move to a less restrictive housing unless there wasn't, and some of the folks spoke about that.
So that is.
Less restrictive housing, unless what? They would move into less restrictive housing after the 30 days, unless what?
Unless they got a new infraction during that period.
Or unless intel was
Or unless-
received that confirmed any additional threat of safety.
Right, but that would be reported to us. We would be in the loop on that. Like somebody from this morning talked about, like there's people get into this EHS entry and they sort of just stay there, or they go from ESS entry to level 1, and it's a continuation. So.
Yeah,
So can I just quickly,
Yes.
I just want to make sure that, you all know me, I like to make sure that we're just clear at every point. So, when we look at the variations in the services provided, the restraints, the lockout time, ESH entry is ESH 1, level 1.
It looks the same.
What is the average length of time for which it takes to complete an assessment?
It all depends on the relationship developed. You know, some young people are more open in the beginning, some young people are
Understood,
very
but
angry.
what is the average length of time?
I would say about 28 to 30 days.
That's the average?
That's the average, because remember, we're asking very personal questions, and day one I ask you a question, you're not going to answer that for me. So it's more about building a rapport through programming, and then they share additional information. They understand that we're there to assist and try to support them through this difficult time. So it's not something where somebody's going to answer those questions on day one.
Is that? what
So
you
I
all
just
found?
want to, maybe in the sake of clarity also, it would be good to hear from Emily about just some background on ESH and the report that we're about to produce, and
Right.
then can we come back to some of the specifics? Yeah.
If I may, though, I haven't finished, and what I'm trying to ascertain and understand as best as I can is how long does it take to complete an assessment, and so that I can better appreciate whether or not entry is, I should say, ESH level 1 is essentially just doing once again entry. Why can you not, and this goes to Judge Hamill's question, why can you not do an assessment during ESH 1 and then make a determination as to whether or not a young person must remain at level 1 or can progress to level 2?
So, for us,
And let me just add,
Yeah.
and during that 28 to 30-day period, be looking at that young person's, engagement, interaction, how they're faring, and use that in making a determination about progression.
quite honestly, we did this kind of more as, when we created entry level particularly, we were focused on the assessment. So we did create an ESH entry, and we focused on what we had to do within that time frame. We had heard it takes 28 days to kind of really get an assessment on actually changing the behavior, so we placed it at 30 days. We focused on entry to kind of put the resources of a support team into that area. You're right. Potentially, you could do that in a level 1. We did it because it was just a kind of an actual physical break, where after the assessment, you could then determine whether or not an individual had participated, kind of gone through the assessments, and you'd made the decision they could go to secure, or level 2, or on to level 1. And in my head, just honestly, I think that was that physical structure, entry level. You're doing this thing. There's a focused support team in there, which is not necessarily as readily available within level 1. And I'm looking to just to kind of confirm that, because that's the assessment period had been done. Now, in this model, I think because level 1 and entry level kind of basically are the same from a physical standpoint. The only difference is that the level 1 did not have this full complement of a support team in that period. So that's why we were committing, and again, this will come up in some of the conditions that Stanley was referencing. We would commit to creating a young adult only ESH, maybe level 1 and level 2, so that 18s can kind of move forward with 19 and 21-year-olds in that cohort and not have to blend them as much. But that's the answer to your question, Jennifer. If people wanted to push and think about whether or not that would fit within level one, I think we would be open to what that would mean. I don't know if we would do it right away, but certainly for the rulemaking, we would certainly consider it. For this variance, we'll consider it if we want to have that discussion, but in general, that's why. There's a separation that
Got
just
it.
came philosophically. And
So one other very quick question, and hopefully it has a quick answer so we can keep moving. Within that 28 to 30-day period during entry, where you are assessing, are you looking at the behavior, the level of engagement of the individual during that 28 to 30-day period, or are you only looking at what prompted the ESH entry?
No, we're looking at the behavior in the unit as well.
Okay. And how many have moved from entry to level 2?
So the total,
Percentage-wise, number and percentage-wise? Jumping over 1.
I'm sorry, 1 second. I just had my finger on that.
Yeah. I think our report reflects people don't really move. That's one of the reasons why, as part of the condition, I was requesting that it's mandatory that people move to a less restrictive unless there's a behavioral reason why they shouldn't.
Right, I'm actually pulling that out.
Yep.
That's what I was.
So,
That's not the current situation, correct? I mean, that's a proposal.
Right.
when you talk about the total progressions, there's been a total of 23. So from level 1 to level 2, this is total from inception. 18 have moved from level 1 to level 2. Level 2 to level 3 had been 2, and level 3 progressions had been 3. And it is also important to note that in those progressions, there were 10 regressions. Once they got to level 2, they committed an act, a slashing, or something that had them revert to a level 1.
Right, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate Stanley's point. And the reason that I am bringing it out is because it helps to inform the question of whether or not you actually need a 1 or 2 or 3. So if people are moving from entry to 2, then that tells us one thing. If people are moving from E to 1, it may tell us another thing, and we need to dig deeper.
And then we also had 2 that went to secure.
Got it.
Emily,
I wanted to comment on 2 things. First, I appreciate Stanley trying to resolve some conflict here regarding the entry unit and the level 1. But, if this is truly an assessment unit and you need 30 days to do it, even if they do another act, your assessment is done. They can move on to a unit that's exactly the same, exactly as restrictive as possible, level 1. That's why I think it's a facade for just punishment. Because, I mean, just listen, 30 days, I need to do an assessment. I've asked them all the questions, they told me all the questions. You're observing their behavior in full chains. I mean, their legs, what do you expect you're gonna find? And then they do something before you've made the determination and you keep them there longer. You've done the assessment. Move them on to level 1, and in level 1, they stay in full leg restraint for 7 hours, for 28 days or 45, whenever you do the assessment. You don't need to keep them there, technically. And the last thing, I know I've said it, it's like, you know, repeating myself, but I really am troubled that in this assessment unit, when you say these young people don't necessarily want to speak, I know what you're talking to them about. Part of what you're talking to them about is what got them there. And what got them there is a cutting, a slashing, a stabbing, and assault.
We're not talking about that.
These are criminal acts. They are criminal defendants. They have lawyers. They are in custody, and you are questioning them when they have a right to a lawyer. So I really have a trouble with this whole
Can I just
assessment.
interject? Because I think the challenge that I'm having, right, and perhaps others on the board are having it, or perhaps you're having it, is we're talking about different levels where maybe we really should be talking about the actual assessment and what is learned from the assessment, and then how you apply that information. Because if you're telling me, based on my question just a minute or 2 ago, that your assessment is informed by current behavior, by behavior before entry and behavior during entry. You're shaking your head no.
Yeah,
That's-
I
did
just want to,
misunderstand that?
yes, I just want to clarify. We do not ask young people about what they did prior to coming in.
Let me say it differently. The conditions, the criteria that caused you to believe that someone should be placed in ESH entry. When you are conducting your assessment, you're looking at that criteria and you're coupling it with what is happening during that person's time in ESH entry. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so what I'm getting at is I'm trying to understand, I think my issue is really more with the assessment that prompts you to say that someone after 30 days should remain in should go to ESH1, which essentially is ESH entry, but now it's a determined placement as opposed to going to ESH2. It's hard for me to immediately opine that maybe they all need to move to level 2 or more need to move to level 2 because I don't really know what is happening during that assessment that's making you determine that someone should still remain in as restrictive a setting.
Right. So just to clarify Judge Hamill's statement, we do not ask young people about what the crime that they committed. That has nothing to do with the assessment. So the second thing is that behavior on the unit is considered and oftentimes is the reason why they do not progress to a level 2. So sometimes it's the fact that they have attacked someone, sometimes it's the fact that they have not adhered to the rules in the unit, sometimes it's intel that we receive that they plan to harm someone, another peer or a staff person. So it's usually the behavior that determines where they go.
We can hear from Emily now. I think one thing we can take away from this discussion is that I think the department ought to consider whether or not they can reduce the assessment time to some period below 30 days. I think a lot of us would like to hear more on that.
Good morning. My name is Emily Turner, and I lead the Board of Correction research team. I want to start by thanking the team, including Andrea Hernandez, Nashla Rivas-Salas, Jim Bennett, and Che Park for their work in putting together our assessment, as well as our monitoring staff that helped us pull this together. We reviewed all young adult placements in ESH from September 2016 through March 2017 and analyzed all available data sources and policies related to the young adult population. We also conducted extended observations of young adult ESH units to better understand how policies were being implemented for this population. And because the young adult ESH is relatively new and policies are evolving, our assessment is descriptive in nature and focuses on process rather than outcomes. As we noted in our response to the department's evaluation proposal, we believe it's too early and too few young adults have been placed in ESH to be able to draw conclusions regarding individual or system level outcomes related to ESH, such as violent reduction. But in terms of due process and our descriptive analysis of the young adult population, in many ways our findings are largely consistent with what the department reports. However, our assessment examines some topics beyond what is addressed in the department's evaluation. Also, our assessment found that many of the recommendations made in our adult report presented in April 2017 are equally applicable to the department's young adult ESH model. We are encouraged by the department's efforts to develop specific policies and a model tailored to the young adult population, as well as the department's adoption of a more multidisciplinary approach to management. And we are encouraged by the department's recent steps towards developing better systems for tracking and monitoring and evaluating ESH. However, despite
this progress, we have concerns about ESH for the young adult population for a variety of reasons. We see such as lockdowns, the lockout schedule, operational issues related to staffing and management, and safety concerns. Many young adults are spending nearly all day locked into their cells rather than the minimum 7 hours provided under ESH standards. Most young adults placed in ESH are shackled to desks when they lock out of their cells. Participation in programming, recreation, and mental health services is very low, particularly in the ESH blended units. And nearly all young adults in ESH, a significant portion, have non-contact visit restrictions imposed for the duration of their incarceration. Very few young adults have progressed to less restrictive housing assignments. Furthermore, there have been a number of really serious slashing and serious acts of violence in these units in which restraint desks are used, which do warrant further investigation. So I'm going to try and move through quickly. I know we've had a lot of discussion about this, but this presents sort of the layout of the different levels. We've discussed there's one and only one, the ESH entry unit, which houses solely young adults. Level 2, there are currently two level 1 ESH housing units, which operate under the same restrictive conditions with 7 hours of lockout and restraint desks in use. And then there's levels 2 and 3, currently 2 level 2 units and 1 level 3 unit, where young adults are blended with adults and must be restrained to desks to attend school. So in terms of the population, as of March 2017, young adults made up 34% of the ESH population and represented only 4% of the total young adult population in DOC housed in ESH. We found that 48% of all young adults in alternatives to punitive segregation were housed in ESH, and that this composition of where young adults are housed and which options has changed over time since the department started using ESH for young adults. We've seen overall a 29% increase in the number of young adults in alternatives to punitive segregation combined over this period, a 43% decrease in the average daily population in the second chance housing, and a 37% decrease in the average daily population in transitional restorative unit. So with ESH as an option, the department has been changing the proportion of individuals in these units. So in terms of recommendations, we recommend that the department and the board conduct an in-depth analysis of all young adults, looking more holistically at the young adult population in DOC custody to understand how all of these alternatives fit together and how they're currently being used. This will help us when we move towards rulemaking, and will help us better understand how these units and whether these units are being reserved for those most responsible for violence, and give us a better sense for how the department is exercising its discretion and what potentially an appropriate capacity would be for these units. In terms of placement, we found that most placement hearings were timely. Most young adults did attend their hearings. We found that most young adults were placed in units where restraint desks were in use and failed to receive proper notice of their restraint desk restriction as required under ESH standards. We found that overall young adults were placed in ESH an average of 61 days and a median of 16 days after the most recent incident cited to justify their placement. But we did see variation in this time from incident to placement by level, with individuals going into the entry unit being most immediately placed. And we did see some from our perspective, although permitted under the standards, some concerns with some outlier cases where there had been an extremely long period of time from the incident that's being used to justify placement. Therefore, we recommend that the department narrow the look-back period for incidents used to justify placement, and that we use restrictive housing rulemaking to clarify how ESH fits into this continuum of young adult options.
Question, Emily? Did, the placements, were there people in there placed solely on the look back?
Yes.
There were, okay.
Yes, but not since the board's variance condition requiring a recent act of violence to be placed in a restraint unit. So we did find that the department complied with that variance condition after February 14th.
Thank you.
But prior to that, there were several placements that used the look-back period, and some of which we were concerned about. So in terms of the length of stay, how long individuals are spending in these units, for those who are still in ESH that have been placed between September and March, we found that on average, young adults had been in for over 6 months, so 6.1 months with a median of 6.4 months. One individual has been in for 282 days, and the minimum length of stay for young adults still housed in ESH is 96 days. For those who have an exit date, which is the majority of those placed during this period have an exit date, the length of stay for those who are eventually released is an average of 2.5 months and a median length of stay of 1.6 months in ESH. In terms of the 28 or 30-day reviews audited by the board, we found that 70% of young people placed in ESH were recommended after that 28 to 30-day assessment period to remain in a unit with a restraint desk, so either ESH entry or an ESH level 1. We found in reviewing the 45-day reviews, which are required under ESH standards, that only 6 individuals progressed to a less restrictive level because of their 45-day review. And then we looked at the time from these reviews and decisions to when individuals were actually moved. We found it took an average of 9 days for the department to move someone out of the entry unit, even after the decision had been made that they should progress, and that it took an average of 16 days after a 45-day assessment once the department had decided an individual is ready to progress. So therefore, we recommend that young adults placed in ESH actually have a meaningful opportunity to progress to a less restrictive setting, and that the department really work to shorten the time from their discretionary decision to the individual's actual movement. I think that will help young adults perceive this process to be more fair.
Were you able to sort of identify any themes on why the recommendations was the continuation of a restrictive unit, or was it just?
So, I guess one of the questions that I have in my mind about the assessment process that's happening in the entry unit is how that is actually tied to a plan and programming, because programming differs between ESH entry and the other levels. Level 1 programming differs from ESH entry, level 2 and level 3 programming differs from level 1 and the entry unit. So it's not clear to me how programming is tied to what's learned in the assessment. So I think that could be an opportunity for the department to think about how what's learned in that assessment is actually developed into a plan that the young adult could use to understand how to move to a less restrictive setting, and then, okay, we're going to move you to the next level. This programming is available in level 2, and we want you to participate in this kind of programming.
Gotcha.
Or we want you to move back to secure, or over to secure, or wherever the individual is being moved, but there's a clear tie between what is learned in this assessment process and what what program is available to where they are being moved to. In terms of programming, we found that boards, during our observations, we observed that there was frequent disruptions to programming while it's in session, and that program participation is much higher in the ESH entry unit than it is in the ESH blended units. We found very low program participation for young adults. Well, actually, we aren't able to tease out participation numbers of actually whether or not it's young adults or adults participating, because these units are blended and the information's not tracked specifically for young adults. But in general, other than the book distribution program, we found that the average program participation was only about 5 people per session offered in blended units, in level 1 blended units, and 2 people per programming session offered in levels 2 and 3. So that's an area for improvement. Therefore, we recommend that the department track young adult program participation specifically for young adults in these blended units, and that overall there needs to be more of an effort to engage young adults in programming because participation is low. In terms of education, 31% of young adults in ESH were enrolled in school. More than half of the students in ESH have an individualized education program, an IEP, and 16% were English language learners. While DOE tracks attendance in both ESH school sessions, there's one session in the morning that's offered for blended, for students in blended units, where they are brought to the ESH entry unit and they are put in a restraint desk to participate in school. And we were unable to tease out whether or not that had a negative effect on education and participation in education, because the data is just not tracked that way. So this is a picture of sort of what the classroom setting is. This is the floor of the ESH entry unit. The desks are very far apart. It's not an ideal classroom setting, individuals in blended units are required to be restrained. So we recommend that the department work to create a separate area that's not in a housing unit to hold school for young adults in a classroom setting, and that the department work to ensure that young adults who are not in a restraint unit do not have to attend school in restraints. We encourage the department to address scheduling conflicts between school and other mandated services, which we've found to be a disincentive for individuals participating in school. And we encourage, and the board will be working with the Department of Education to work on more public reporting on school attendance in these units. In terms of treatment needs and access to treatment, 61% of ESH placements were receiving mental health services before placement in the sample that we looked at, again, September through March. 31% of young adults had a substance use disorder prior to placement. In terms of access to treatment, we found the department did not produce 30% of scheduled health encounters and 23% of scheduled mental health encounters, and that 34% of individuals in ESH experienced an injury during their placement. So actually 34% of injuries were due to a use of force. So we recommend that the department and correctional health continue to work together to improve access to medical and mental health care through implementation of the Access Action Plan, which we'll be hearing about more soon, and that there need to be more options for mental health services and substance use disorder treatment options available for young adults. In terms of conditions of confinement, we found that due to lockdowns, individuals in ESH had 39% fewer potential hours of out-of-cell time than required under ESH minimum standards. That's just looking at the amount of out-of-cell time that was reduced due to lockdowns. This is not taking into account other issues we've identified through our observations regarding staffing and individuals not actually being locked out on time, or lockout not being implemented according to schedule. We found that participation in recreation was very low, with an average of only 20% of young adults participating in recreation, and that is due in part to the physical conditions of the recreation facilities, and we found that recreation is consistently understaffed, and it's not always provided timely and daily. The average daily participation for young adults in ESH during our study period ranged between 1 and 7 individuals monthly, the average daily participation in rec. So we also took a snapshot of individuals housed on March 31st to see who was currently under restrictions. We found that 2/3 had a non-contact visit restriction, and nearly all of those restrictions were for duration, non-contact visit restrictions that are subject to a 6-month review, but that means that there really is no incentive or no opportunity for contact with family. So part of our recommendations related to conditions of confinement involve we encourage the department to continue to pilot strategies that address the root causes of violence. We're encouraged to find out that the department is piloting the Cure Violence model. We would encourage them to do that. It is critical to really define the problem so that we can develop the strategies to address the violence. We think the department could do more to incentivize recreation for young adults and address the barriers to the physical conditions of the recreation space and staff shortages. And we would encourage the department to reconsider some of these duration non-contact visits, just to sort of help give individuals hope and something to work towards as potentially an incentive to behave well in the unit. We will be posting our full report online shortly, and encourage everyone to find it on our website. And I will turn it over to the board for questions.
Emily, one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, go ahead.
Bobby has a PowerPoint.
First, I want to thank Emily and the staff of the board. That was a terrific presentation. Almost chilling, I would say. I mean, and I'm going to talk about some additional parts of that. I mean, we did have a very good discussion, I thought, before about entry and the false language, around it, and the failures to do what we're supposed to do. But really, this is a terrible unit. The initial three. Where's the? You make it bigger. That's it. The first. The first three of my slides are just the language from the report, which say that the board staff remain concerned about ESH for the young adults for a variety of reasons. She said this, but I'm just going to say it again. Lockdowns, the lockout schedule, operational issues related to staffing and management, safety concerns, general lack of engagement. Most young adults are spending nearly all day locked into their cells rather than the minimum 7 hours under the standard. That's what's going on in this facility. They are shackled to desks when they lock out, and the participation in programs is very low, especially in the blended units. And then the contact thing that you talked about at length. Now, people are in there for a long time. I think Emily gave the slide, but it's more than 6 months. This is not a short-term unit. People were saying this, our maximum time in PSU is 30 days, except for an attack on the staff. Here, these are 6 months. that people are there. Now, there's minimal recreation in these units. DOC is failing to provide the staff. They've told our staff that they only get 2/3 of the staff they need to provide recreation. People in entry unit and in level 1 are in cages. I don't know if you've been to see these cages. They're individual cages. They're metal. There are no balls. There are no seats. There's no thing to pull yourself up on. There's no cover from the sun. There's no cover from the rain. It is required by the Department of Correction that before anybody can leave their cell in an ESU restraint unit, entry or level 1, that there has to be an ESU captain present with a dog and a taser in the unit. Or maybe it's a dog and a taser. That's what the policies are in this report. I've been talking about the use of dogs in these units for the last 4 or 5 meetings that we've had. This is the policy. These are memorandum that require that. And just to let you know, the Department of Education did not ask for these restraint units. We've been told by the department that education is the one who really wanted these things. They did not ask for that according to their staff, based upon our staff interviews with them. There is no difference in the attendance. We were also told that one of the most important reasons to have ESH restraints, desk restraints, people manacled, now they're no longer manacled, but people shackled to these desks, is to increase participation in education. It didn't happen. It hasn't happened. And it makes the teachers not be afraid of their own students. This is not the way to improve education. And 1/3 of the time that's supposed to be spent in education, this key issue that the department has been raising consistently, doesn't happen because the security staff don't come, because the security staff don't bring the young men to their classes. Now, it's true that people who do come may get improvement in their reading, and that's a tribute, or math scores. That's a tribute to the teachers, but that's not an excuse for treating them in this particular manner. There's no classroom. You think this is not a classroom that's going on to members of the board and to members of the audience. This is an open area. The teachers say we need a classroom. The department has made no efforts to establish a classroom. These are desks in the middle of this room where people are shackled. There's a dog at the front of the room or closer, barking, distracting the students, distracting the teachers. This is the unit that we're being asked to endorse right now. That's it. I'm not going to vote to shackle kids in a unit that provides that runs this way. And I know we're going to talk about some really great improvements through the process. I have a series of recommendations. I don't know if that's the best way to go now or not.
But I'd like the department to respond to some of these concerns that you're raising here. I mean, these concerns go to sort of the.
I mean, they've seen all this stuff.
So
maybe you can just start by saying whether you agree with the basic accuracy or inaccuracy of the report, and then if you want to comment on any specifics, that would be helpful as well.
So, openly, I've not had I've read through the report, but there are issues with kind of how things are referenced, particularly in terms of the presentation. I think it is fair to say up front that when we use terms like most and so forth, it is an actual correlation that many of the individuals who were used, based on the criteria that we worked together to develop, were on immediate placements that came after slashings and stabbings, serious assaults, whether against staff or other inmates, that resulted in serious injuries. So it is easy enough to kind of understand why there were issues around the security concerns and the placement of these individuals. Furthermore, when we say most, we have to go down to the fact that these are very small numbers. Over the population that are in any kind of restraint desk whatsoever, right now, we only have 17. So that is of the 986 young adults. So what we are trying to do with the young adults broadly is being lost in the presentation, because we are trying to focus on ways that we do not use punitive segregation, that we do engage the young adults, that we do offer programming, increasing the programming from what was less than 45 minutes to a full 5 hours, education that was 3 hours to 5 hours, Those are efforts we are trying to focus on throughout the entire department with the entire young adult population and the adolescents. We have made great strides to eliminate the punitive segregation for the adolescents, great strides to eliminate it for 18 to 21-year-olds. We know that there is an issue that is vexing for all of us right now, for those who are the most problematic in violence. And as we go through these assessments, maybe it isn't the perfect solution. We are trying to figure it out. We can do better in taking that assessment and trying to figure out better programming. We can do better to find better young adult specific programming that we can provide to these individuals. Participation rate may be higher amongst the ESH entry because they are focused on young adults. It is true, what we are doing with the young adults once we blend it, we focused on adult programming. Participation isn't as high. As we move forward, as we've committed to the board to creating other ESH young adult specific units that progress up, those can be focused on very specific young adults. So I can't go into all the specifics because I just don't remember all the things that were on the slides, but I can tell you right now, as a matter of policy, we don't have the completed policy. We are drafting because we are trying to figure out the best practices. We have had failures in ESH level entry unit, the desks. Initially, we had restraints and people could easily pop from their keys, and we resulted in slashings where people in the areas around desks reached out and cut other people. That's true. We then changed the locks and actually tried to buy new locks to kind of fabricate so that you couldn't actually steal just a regular cuff key. And we've had issues with that as well. So we continue to assess this and make the changes, which is why we come to the board often and say, we need this variance or we need this change because we have to make that adjustment. We want to participate in the rulemaking because we know that the conversation has to be a long and story one. We have committed in our assessment that I had just said to the commissioner, we do a lot about reporting about safety and security and violence. We don't do as much about program, not participation, but the impact of that programming. Right. We do have to do better with that. We have to do that generally because we're about to add 5 hours of programming to the entire department and assess which of those programs are more effective than others. So I guess my comment is only that I think that it is an unfair assessment in terms of just the wording that was used. I do believe that there are many areas where I think, particularly in Emily's presentation, there are a lot of areas where we've got to kind of improve. But I think that we have shown and demonstrated that we are making those adjustments on both sides. One, to kind of push the boundaries of what we can do in terms of alternatives to punitive seg, but also in terms of what we've got to adjust to in terms of security concerns. Constantly trying to limit the numbers of people and the individuals for which we actually feel this might be necessary. Can we do better? Absolutely. I don't think anyone wants to shy away from that. I think that's why we have engaged, certainly in the last month, much more with the board to discuss their specific concerns and try to adjust for those things.
Maybe you can provide us with a written response, say by the September meeting. That would be helpful.
Thank you.
I think, I do have a lot of comments, but I think that that would be appropriate to provide it in writing because there are a lot of discrepancies that we have. In addition, I do think it's important to note that along with attendance, one thing that hasn't been mentioned is, well, there are two things that have been mentioned that I just wanted to clarify. One is, it was mentioned earlier that the option to use ESH is being utilized more than options to use true and second chance. We have to remember that ESH has a criteria, and if young people meet the criteria for ESH, then we're not utilizing ESH because we choose to use it, we utilize it because those are the crimes that are being committed while in custody. That's one. And then two, I did want to mention that one thing that wasn't discussed.
What about secure? I mean, a lot of your criteria are really the same, but it's secure instead.
So,
at least there's 10 hours.
So it's very shortly you'll hear more about how we've changed that.
Maybe Stanley, you want to talk about some things you have, because I think, that might clarify some of the confusion if, Stanley, you go through some of the points you want to make.
Yeah, that's what, after you speak, I think the way to go forward is to talk about the way that we could get this next 6 months moving forward and tied into the votes, the changes around secure, the changes around the eligibility, the commitment on the department's behalf to really use the presumption of moving to a less restrictive. Like, let's talk about what we got agreement on that we can get us past this next 6 months until we can get to the rulemaking, I think.
And who has that list? Do you have that list, or does Jeff have that list?
Jeff has it.
Yeah, okay, I think that would be more productive use of time.
Yeah, we can come back to the report in September.
I'm going to make some more comments before the vote.
Sure.
Now, Jeff, what you're about to discuss now, is this going to be part of a set of conditions?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I don't know, and actually I'll ask the executive director just on how she wants to process. I have a list of a couple of things, and I can just kind of go through those that we just inherently agree to. How do you want to process?
That those of us who want to make comments on what's been presented in the variance, be able to make the comments, and then they can obviously offer ways to try to make this more palatable.
But he might have something to say that will actually address what your comments. So I'd like to hear Jeff first.
So broadly, I think that we've tried to kind of better outline kind of the continuum from secure to ESH. For ESH, we certainly understand that there should be a presumption, and one upfront. We'll commit to kind of engaging and utilizing, as the judge suggested, kind of the assessment into whatever further kind of programming outside of the entry unit. But we agree that for any placement that goes into ESH entry level, if a person for the first time goes in there and they've committed a serious assault or slashing or stabbing, there is a presumption that they are going to move on to a lower level. If they don't commit any infractions and there is no credible intel that they are planning to execute another act of violence, they'll be moved on to level 2 or another alternative space, whether that's secure or other thing. Now, if another individual enters into the ESH entry, but has previously been in entry for a similar kind of serious injury, slashing or stabbing, that presumption is gone based on the fact that at that point there is a significant kind of behavior issue that we have to address that may not be addressable within that first entry assessment period. Secondarily, obviously, we've committed to, and I think that Martha will go through several of these, kind of a lot of just the general reporting of how we have to do this, and we remain committed to the criteria for who would actually be entered into the entry level, which is an immediate action that results in a serious injury or a slashing or stabbing or related to that effort. So I think those are some of the big issues. I know that there are other variances that you'll raise just based on the previous
And
request.
could you talk a little bit about the secure?
Yes.
Like what does, who?
So alternatively, because we understand and we recognize that for a while we had the same criteria for secure and ESH, I think as Judge Hamels correctly pointed out, because we thought that was the only place for a while until we created ESH. So we are adjusting the criteria for secure to move towards the less violent. Those that may have had a history of slashing and stabbing in the past, but then recently commit an assault that either results in no injury or minor injury, they'll be placed in secure. If there is any actual violent kind of measure, they'll move on to ESH. Furthermore, we will be not using restraint desks within the secure area except for the school, and the concern there is a logistical one. As we move people through, I think we've been very open about how the quads don't necessarily work as well as we need, and so that'll be placed in there. And we will provide a report out to the board weekly on kind of what those concerns are about why the security measures were necessary within the school area.
Right, on an ongoing basis. So those elements, if people have questions now about those, because those will be attached to those variances.
As conditions.
However, Martha, if you want to put them in as conditions, Martha, can we put them in as conditions, or?
Maybe we can read off of the record.
There are other conditions for that.
And Bobby has conditions.
We really need something in writing, that's the problem.
We've been hearing about what a terrific secure model we have and how it's been working for so many young people. By doing what Stanley and you, like it appears, maybe have worked out to lowering or minimizing the amount of violence of those inmates that go into secure, then you're just adding, like, you've got true and shoe, which isn't really violent yet, and then secure, and now you're going to have even a greater need for young adult enhanced supervision. It was my understanding this was always supposed to be a stopgap while you built another secure unit. Because when we did when we did enhanced supervision, 7 hours of lockout, make no bones about it. The only reason the board agreed with the 7 hours, to my knowledge, is because you said we're gonna have 50 adults. We can't have all 50 hardened criminals out at the same time. We can therefore 7 hours for 25 on one tier and 7 hours for the other 25. Now you've got just a couple of kids on these units and you're locking them out for only 7
Judge,
hours.
just to clarify, you are actually mixing two different
populations. You were
When
gonna
we
use secure for
create
this
ESH,
population.
it was for adults. You're referencing now only a couple of young adults because when we did create ESH, Commissioner Pont stated up here that it was focused on, and you were part of the conversations about whether or not to include 19 to 21-year-olds in ESH. That was an effort that we focused. When you say 50, it's a small young adult population. It is true. But then you're also mixing 151 are in any level of ESH, and that includes the adults.
That's because you're blending them. That's because
No,
you're
that's
blending
because
them.
we focused on the adults at first, and then we added the young. This isn't a blending issue. This is adding a population because we recognize that we did have to and you're right, absolutely, by the way, we are adding extra pieces to this. We want a full continuum. That is actually the goal. Something that we have committed to the board, to the public, and to the federal monitor, that we would create an honest continuum that did not rely on what was before a one, punitive seg or nothing general population. We want to move away from that. And the only way to move from that is to actually develop a proper continuum.
Okay, but do you agree that right now, the enhanced supervision that is operational for the young adults, certainly looking at Emily's statements, which I'll read again at this, is abysmally failing these young people. It is not tailored to the young adults. Forget the criteria for a minute. What you're actually doing is not tailored to the young adults.
And you also heard from me our commitment to focus in on better providing, one, the space, and then two, the specific programming. We did I said that in the previous kind of statement that we do better within the entry unit, actually, in terms of program participation. We need to do better as we move forward to the other levels. I'll let Wynette speak to the programming.
Can I just, hold on one second, please?
Sure.
I think where we are now, it makes more sense to understand what outstanding issues are more appropriately addressed through the rulemaking, and also try to resolve the specific set of issues that are in front of this meeting today. I mean, I think a lot of this discussion is quite relevant, but it's not going to get resolved today, and it may be more appropriate to deal with it in the rulemaking process. So if we can go back to the conditions that Jeff described, which Stanley described, and have a discussion, hopefully limited to those, and then we can take those up. Understanding there are a larger and a broader set of issues, but they're not going to get resolved today. And so, and mindful of the time and mindful of the agenda, I would ask you to consider that. Mr. Cohen, Dr. Cohen, our side.
There's a fundamental issue here, which is the shackling of young people and old people, middle-aged people. It's the shackling, the long shackling for weeks and months that occur. Shackling should be used only for assuring the safety of an individual, of an institution, of staff for a shorter period of time as possible. That is how you use shackling.
I don't think any of us disagree with that.
No, I understand, but this discussion does not include shackling as an issue. So if we're talking about continuing units with shackling, I mean, this history is important here, Derek, and it is where we're at, but we didn't vote for shackling. We voted for ESH in order to get solitary confinement ended for people under 21. That's why that was the deal that was made 2.5 years ago to get rid of solitary confinement for those under 21 and to reduce the number of people in solitary confinement who are older than 21. And that's what we did. We did not vote to put adolescents in it. We didn't vote to have shackling of anybody in it. And now we have a situation where young adults, where half of them are shackled, and I this is the issue to me, Derek. I mean, the other stuff is all good movement. If you limit the amount of time that people are kept in the most restrictive unit to the less, that's a good idea. But this is a dangerous situation, independent, although very important, the fact that the education is barely happening, that there are dogs barking, it's all the things that I talked about. It is unsafe to have people in these chairs. There was an incident in December, there was an incident last month, where some people get out of chairs and other people are stuck in chairs. And people are not leaving the chairs because they think it is leaving their cells, because they believe it is dangerous to them, because this system of restraint chairs puts people at risk. That is what the board has told staff members since the day ESH restraint opened in the, for adults when you close down units, other units in the facility. That is what is happening right now. That is a major cause of that. Those are substantial issues, unresolved right now. I mean, we just heard about the high incidence of self-harm that occurs in this area. To me, the restraint desks are essential. Now, I understand that there's not a majority of the board that does not want to have restraint desks at this point. I'm sure there will be sometime in the future. But in the meantime, that has to be part of our discussion right now.
Well, yes. So if the question is, given where we are right now, what is, given the fact that we have a number of difficult choices to make, what is the least problematic of those choices that we can try to agree on today and move forward, understanding that there are a broader set of issues that have to be resolved? So that's, I think, how this issue has to be approached. No one on the board thinks restraint desks are a positive idea. People are quite concerned that these were imposed without our knowledge and imposed outside the normal process of interaction between the board and the department, and lack of transparency there. That is all, we've all agreed with that. But we are faced with a set of facts, and we are faced with a set of issues that we need to resolve today. So I'd like to bring us back to that discussion to see where we can make some progress, understanding the broader set of issues will be dealt with sooner rather than later in the rulemaking process. Yeah.
And where does
So I'd like to talk about the conditions, and I'd like to talk about.
That's fine. I mean, I was just saying, I'm not going to vote. I mean, we can talk about the conditions. I'm not going to vote for allowing. The question of course is, can young adults be kept in ESAs? That's the basic variance that's being asked for, and I'm not going to vote for that as long as people get shackled. We can talk about the conditions. I proposed a condition that said that automatically that the entry unit be limited to a week, because I still haven't heard why it needs to be longer, and that after 4 weeks, if people haven't committed an infraction, they be advanced. And the same.
You mean the assessment process when you say the entry?
I think the assessment process should be no more than a week.
Yeah.
And advancement should occur within 4 weeks if there are no intervening infractions. And Stanley proposed something similar to that. This is not as his is slightly different, and the department has their own.
Well, I have one question. If you don't have an ESA, what's the alternative? When you have these violent 34, you have currently 34 individuals that are in this unit that are violent, that have committed acts in prison, in the facility. What would be your option? I want to hear from them. What would be your option to house these individuals?
Right now, we don't have one because, we've eliminated punitive seg, so we're not going to put them in punitive seg. So I don't have an alternative.
Let me just ask, I mean, at this point, if there was not the young adult plan that was carving out exception that they not be placed in punitive seg, these young people would be in punitive seg for 30 days. They'd be in a cell, and they'd get to go out for recreation, showers, phone calls, and some visits. But 30 days, they would be moved on. Right now, they can be in leg restraints for actually 30 days entry, another 28 days. We see that some of these young people never move on and stay on. So I'll bet, actually many of the kids have told me they'd rather go into punitive seg for 30 days, do their time, and get out versus this. This is seen as much more punitive. So would you just, since I was the one that sort of brokered this with Commissioner Pond 3 years ago or whenever it was, would you just prefer to have punitive SEG for 30 days and put them in there?
Absolutely not.
You wouldn't?
I would not want punitive SEG. The whole point of this, at least in terms of, was to try to engage with the young adults, to put more programming, as we've said, like the in-person engagement was a very important part of what we were trying to do. So I would not. I mean, I now will defer to the commissioner on this one because this is now, you're asking a pretty personal question. I've been committed as a person to reduce punitive SEG as much as possible because we should only use it when it's necessary. We are committed to developing the alternatives that actually engage individuals within our custody. And that's something very important as a city that we've committed to. The reason we get to kind of tout kind of what we do here in New York City is because we are willing to push the envelope and push this agenda. So I am not going to say that I'm going back to that.
Well, then the last
Chair,
thing I would
I'm a
say
little
is
concerned
if
about
you
the
look at
tone of
Eloise-
this, that this is taking. I think we're going a little too far here, and we're going off course, and we are questioning and challenging the intentions of the department. I do not think that this department has acted in a way that suggests that they are seeking to be more punitive than not. This is a very challenging issue, and I think we need to stick to, to the different types of housing that are being presented, the concerns that are raised with each, and not hurl at one another any accusations of people wanting something that they do not intend. I just don't think we should be doing this.
I just want to clarify, my question came from a point where I think this department is doing something that's very creative. If you look around this country, segregation, I'll take out the word punitive, okay, because I think it's redundant. It's segregation. Offenders are locked in their cells 23 hours a day, 1 hour for shower, 1 hour for visits. That's how most SEGs work. You guys have come up with an attempt to create a solution, but in doing so, there's going to be problems. I beg you to look at other correctional systems that try to get inmates educated, recreation, do these kinds of things in other systems around the country. It's not done. This is like the first of its kind. So with it comes challenges, and I think that's what we're facing with challenges. And we need to, instead of, argue here, we need to come up with solutions collectively.
Exactly.
That's what we need to do. Because, we can point out all the problems that we want, but really, we have to be solution-focused. We said earlier, the other thing that I'm concerned about is like staff safety, right? And things, and the other inmate safety. And I think that's what you're trying to work at here. But we gotta work collectively to how we house these individuals in a safe environment and allow them to program and do things, maybe without restraints, but those things have to be discussed. And we're not gonna solve those things today. But we need to come from that angle, from working together, the board and you guys, to come up with how we can effectively work with these 18 to 20 minutes. That's how I see it.
And for me, the restraints, I agree with Bobby. The restraints are not the way I'd like to go with it. But I think the restraints should be dealt with in the rulemaking, not through variances. I think this is about how do we get to the place where we can do rulemaking that's consistent with the way the board wants the department to be managing young people in a partnership and in a fair way.
So procedurally, can someone read, for benefit of the board, read into the record what the current proposed conditions are?
I can read into the record. I'm going to start with the conditions that are currently attached to the ESH variance. And board members, you should have a list in front of you. The first, during the pendency of this variance, each request for approval of a placement of a young adult in ESH must be in writing and specify the reasons why a less restrictive housing setting is not a safe option. If the placement is to include the use of a restraint desk, the request for approval must include why ESH without restraint desks is not a safe option. The chief of department or designee must also specify her reasons for approving or disapproving the request for ESH placement. If the placement is to include the use of a restraint desk, the chief or her designee must separately approve or disapprove this use and specify her reasons for approving or disapproving the use of a restraint desk. The request for approval and the chief's or designee's approval or disapproval thereof shall be sent within 24 hours to the person who is the subject of the request, New York City Health and Hospitals, and the board. I want to make a note that that's slightly modified from what's currently. Is that exact language of what's currently on the? Okay. Moving on to the next. A young adult can only be.
Can you just ask Nancy, what?
Yeah, why don't we, yes, we can
Okay.
move through, yes.
Just one question. What happens during that 24-hour period? Where is the person placed during that 24-hour period?
The person after the chief's approval and when we get notification, that person's likely in ESH already. Is that true?
I'm sorry.
Jennifer asked when, in the 24-hour period,
Where is the
Yes.
person?
between the approval and then when it comes to us or to H&H, where is the person housed? The young person?
Person is probably in ESH.
I think that's true.
Okay.
Much, yeah. The placement comes and then we're.
So, thank you, Judge Hamel. That's a good idea to treat this one first. Someone can move what I just read.
Yeah, can we have a motion and a second to
Moved.
approve the first, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we're gonna do these individually.
Yeah.
Dr. Sapir.
In favor?
Favor?
I vote in favor of it.
Okay, we're moving on to the next condition, which is adapted from the February 2017 variance. A young adult can only be placed in a restraint desk for out-of-cell time if the person has recently participated in an actual or attempted slashing or stabbing or engaged in activity that caused serious injury to an officer, another person in custody, or any other person, and provided that the use of a restraint desk is the less restrictive option necessary for safety.
Dr. Sapir?
Second. In favor?
Yeah.
In favor?
I support it.
The next condition is regarding a monthly public report. We have an attached document. What? That is on the website that describes the monthly public report. The board and the department have worked very closely together to work out the details of that public report. So the condition is to require that monthly public report. I'm not going to go through the details of it here. Yeah.
Is there a motion?
Moved.
Second? Second. Dr. Sapir? Natalie?
Favor?
In favor?
Support it.
The next condition. Do you have a list in front of you right now? I do. Okay. During the pendency of this variance, on at least a monthly basis, the department shall provide the board access to all documentation considered in each ESH placement and review decision for young adults. This includes, but is not limited to, all records reviewed or created by ESH adjudication, Health and Hospitals Placement Review, the Chief's Reviews, the ESH Entry Unit Review Committee, and the ESH 45-day periodic review. On a monthly basis, the department shall transmit a list of all ESH placements and reviews. The department shall provide the documentation by the 10th business day of August, September, October, November, and December, and the 5th business day of January. That's attached to the current variance also. Can we,
Is there a motion on this?
Moved.
Second? Second. Dr. Sapir?
Favor?
In favor?
Yeah, I support it. Thank you.
The next condition, by December 28th, 2017, the department shall submit an update to its June 2017 evaluation of enhanced supervision housing for young adults. The update shall focus on outcomes and include progress updates on the key issues they and the board identified in initial, a word is missing before me, in the initial report. That's my fill-in.
Is there a motion?
This is an update on the report that you've already, the evaluation you've provided.
Is there a second? Dr. Sapir? Yes. Anna?
Favor?
In favor.
Yes.
Bobby, do you want me to read your conditions?
I'll read it. So
Okay.
in disagreement with the chair, although generally we're in agreement, I think in this particular case, given the administrative failures of the issue, a 3-month variance is appropriate in this case. So that, as my resolution was, this variance expires after 3 months. So moved.
Is there a second? So we have to vote on that as well. Dr. Sapir?
I'll support it.
I'll support it.
Yes.
In favor.
Yep. Same.
Yeah, the second one is that, just to say, your point was very well taken before. The notion that we had been developing was that secure was going to be the end of the line, the most severe. The department had not figured out how to run secure yet, which is why we allowed ESH. That was before you joined. So the length of time that young adults are housed in the ESH Edge unit shall not exceed 7 days per ESH placement.
We object to this one.
Can I just ask a question there?
Yeah.
Would you consider, say, I'm just making it, 14 days, if that's something that the department, if they really can't do 7 days, I don't think we should impose that on them. But so,
Yes.
Given the fact that most of these have been fine, I think we would have preferred 6 months on this just to get to the rulemaking idea, so we can actually have that discussion. But on this one, we based it on the fact that assessments that have worked in PACE and CAPS don't have any time frame to them. Normally, there is literature on the 28-day factor of kind of actual behavior observation to show actual movement. So I think we are learning, so I don't think anyone's trying to lie to you on that one, but we picked the 28 because we did actually have some logic behind what we were trying to do in that. Trying to observe not just what was an initial reaction right after an incident, but over time, while still maintaining a sense of safety for people who had participated in a very violent act. So we object to the idea of a 7-day, and I think I would push back on a 14-day. I think that we really want to focus on the assessment. I think that, to Jennifer's point about kind of creating that level 1, I mean, I think maybe you could do it in there, but there's an assessment that we want to do, and that is in a time frame that Wynette has planned with her team that is within the 28-day period.
and you
Changing
really
that
do
up
think,
right now.
you really do think that the department needs the 28 days as a,
And Derek, I'll be honest with you, I think that it's only because this is what we've designed. Can we go back and explore, I mean, this is gonna, now 3 months, can we explore what that assessment is and whether or not we need that? Hold on, that's a different thing, but that is what we've designed right now. All the pieces that Wynette described about in that assessment are pieces she placed together for the 28 days.
But just so that for the record, as I did ask Jeanette, couldn't all this be done in level 1? Because all the restrictions and everything is exactly the same.
No,
And I believe your response was, gee, you hadn't thought about it. But yeah.
No, Judge, I think
So
that's
it
why I
could be
mentioned to
limited.
her that we were gonna create an extra space, and that philosophically, we had one that was focused in on this assessment and then the movement. So you,
well, look,
That's-
given now that the variance itself is only 3 months, maybe the 28 days can, if you say you really do need that, maybe we can leave that where it is. I suggest that to the board to consider. Maybe we can leave that where it is during the 3-month period, and that's one of the things you look at. And we come back to the broader issue in 3 months anyway. So, Dr. Cohen, is that something you would consider?
I'll withdraw it.
Yeah.
Let me go to the other side, Bobby, for your next condition.
Sorry. So this last one, the next one is no shackling of adults, young adults in ESA may occur except during the process of transport in and out of the unit. Young adults will not be placed in 2-point restraints.
sorry, for the board's consideration, may we go back to the 3 month and ask for 4 months to actually take into consideration the school year that is, we'll have, there won't be any actual, I'm sorry. Can we go back to the condition about the 3 months and push to 4 months because of the fact that what we want to do is actually assess kind of from a schooling standpoint, and there's no schooling going on in any secure or ESH during these summer months.
Yeah, but this doesn't start till August, because the one we have is until August, so it gives you until December, so that ultimately is your 3 months.
I think they were just trying to ask for time to kind of assess it within the schools. You go to 4 as opposed to 3, just to not assess.
I just want to ask a point of clarification, and I guess I'm asking this of you, Bobby. The board, appreciating that you did not vote in favor of condition number 2, tell me how to square condition number 2 with this condition.
I didn't vote for number 2.
Right, I
Well, how
understand
can you
that, but
do
I'm just saying,
you know, what I think is that the department should have a, you know, what they were going towards, which is a secure unit for young adults, which has the physical, you know, capacity and the staffing capacity to isolate people in small groups and not shackle them or place them in by themselves 23 hours a day. That's what we worked for a long time. The department kept putting off ending solitary confinement for young adults because it kept asking us for more time for secure. It became a crisis sort of internally, and we agreed temporarily to allow, without talking about putting people in restraints when they were out of their cells, to allow ESH. So I think the answer is to not only to use restraints when you need to move someone one place to another. I mean,
Right.
the department restraint, you know, takes people out of, you know, when someone commits a slashing, they are not sort of left there in this day room. You remove them to some place, right? You don't just leave them there. You bring them to
right,
intake or something.
I completely understand
I'm
what you're
sorry,
saying, and I understand your intention behind it, and I appreciate it. What I'm really, I guess I'm asking the board a question, and and this is maybe a more process, and we've just voted to approve condition number 2, which allows for the use of a restraint desk. And now we're looking at a condition that says that restraint desks cannot be used. So how should we square this at this point? Are we just going to vote again?
Well, you can vote it down.
Vote down.
Is what you do. I mean, if you
But I just want to point out that
if you want to take us through that process, we can. Otherwise, I think if it's really, it doesn't square. So can we move on, or should we have the vote anyway? It's not, I mean, it doesn't square, Bobby, is what she's saying.
Okay, so, I mean, fine, the board has voted to continue shackling. I can remove this. It's a shame, but hopefully we'll bring it up next time.
And there's one more here, Bobby, which
Okay,
is
I'm sorry.
similar to Stanley's next issue, but
After a maximum, if a young adult in the ESH has not committed an infraction within the preceding 28 days, that young adult will advance to a less restrictive level or unit. I still want to have this here, Stanley. I mean, there are two issues. One is the notion of intel. I have not been convinced after almost 8 years on the Board of Correction that intel has been valuable in terms of predicting behavior, and so that's a way to keep someone in restraints longer. And additionally, you know, the notion of a predicate requirement for you did one thing and therefore you're going to stay in level 1 forever, which is basically what you're saying. I don't think the board should support that. It should be based on people's behavior. Just as in punitive segregation. I mean, you used to keep people in punitive segregation forever. People would be kept in for hundreds of days, years at a time. Now we don't do that, and I don't want to condemn people for as long as we require restraints in ESH 1 to being restrained forever based upon not allowing them to improve their behavior.
So is your point then, what we do is after 30 days, if the person has not committed a violent infraction during that time, they advance?
Yes.
And so we don't take intel into consideration as one of the factors as to whether or not the person advances. Is that what that's essentially what you're saying?
Yes, because yes, that is the thing. I mean, intel.
No, he has, but you have credible intel here.
Oh, I didn't put. No, that's not mine. Mine is the one before that. That's yours.
Oh.
we would need to square these two up.
So the question is credible intel versus intel. Is that the distinction? Credible intel versus intel? Is that the distinction?
No.
Well, I think part of the distinction too is Bobby just says in enhanced supervision. Stanley's is specific to the entry unit. So I think what you're building is a presumption that you move on, no matter what level you're in enhanced
That's what I
supervision.
said.
That's what you're proposing, which is what Para recommended.
Yeah,
But that should be the presumption.
Bobby,
Yes.
You know, the review period is different in some of the other units. Did you mean 30 regardless of unit,
Well,
or
I
do
thought
you
30
mean
was a
45?
nice day. I thought 30, I would, if the board would prefer to vote in favor of 45 days, I would agree with that.
Or maybe whatever the existing review period is in that unit.
Yes. That's fine.
I'll second that.
So I would like at least an opportunity to kind of speak on
Please.
the department's behalf on this one. If there is a distinction that is being made between Dr. Cohen's condition versus the condition that Stanley Richards is providing, on the first, if it is broadly a blanket statement in ESH that just because there is no infraction and every 28-day they move on, we object. We certainly have a 45-day period assessment that goes on now. It does take into a consideration kind of behavior. It also takes into consideration intel. I don't agree that credible intel is not useful. I have, certainly in my time, there are days when you don't have intel, other days when you have bad intel. Other days you have very credible intel, particularly these days with kind of more camera and coverage across and more investigative teams and intelligence personnel inside the facilities. More gang participation within the jails, more gang arrests that are occurring outside in the streets that are coming into our jails. We know more now than we have in the past, so I just do not accept that would not be a criteria. I just don't agree with this criteria.
And I'd be willing to broaden my condition to include all levels of EHS, and I would include credible intel with the condition that the department, if they use that basis to hold people in that particular, that they notify the board based on that. That if they only use credible intel, that they notify the board.
I want to make a very clear distinction between kind of two different populations. So within entry and level 1, the placement is on a very immediate impact. Other levels, especially for the adults, is a different issue. And so we do take into consideration just their behavior and program participation because we want them to go through those programs, much like the challenge program that we implemented for the adults, which is a step process that doesn't kind of limit to a certain day and just not on infraction. I understand the need because we want to move them out of kind of the restraint desks, but in terms of just blanketly staying any movement to kind of less restrictive housing, want to make sure that there's a fair assessment that goes on inside those areas. So there's an understanding on the levels that include the restraint desks, but there's a separate issue. Once you get out of the restraint desk, it's normally ESH, and I don't want to change that.
Yeah, if I just may add here, this takes me back to my earlier point about the assessment. And while I completely appreciate what Stan is proposing here, I also appreciate the points that you made earlier. And my concern when I look at this is that it's not yet getting at the underlying issue about why people are not moving and whether or not it's something that you're finding in the assessment, something that is happening in those first 28 to 30 days during entry. And so, I feel as though I'm challenged because I feel like I'm limited and I'm being asked to make decisions here without lack of information that really helps me to appreciate. If you just, just make it as a practice, as a rule that people move, but we're not taking into account what's happening during that assessment period. And I get these 3 unlesses, but I'm still not sure based on your earlier response about what is happening during assessment as to whether or not that even captures this. I feel like I have limited information on which to make an informed decision here.
You hired Bureau to analyze this issue. Have you reviewed their report? Have you released their report?
No, they have not released their report.
And you have not released their report. Have you gotten a report from them?
We've gotten it back, yes.
And did that report suggest that a problem in the ESH is that people are not being advanced from level to level?
They speak to kind of the evaluation process, which I think Jennifer is absolutely
But
right.
do they also speak to the fact that people do not advance from level to level, and a suggestion that it is a fundamental principle of correctional policy that if you do not have a way beyond something that it's,
Their
that's
point is to make
not
sure
work.
that we are clear about what the progressions can be. And ensuring that we kind of follow the progression, which at least for what we have been trying to do is follow those, whether through the assessment, through kind of the program participation or other things. We can improve on what those pieces are, but we have tried to focus in on what we said we would do in terms of their behavior, their program participation, and their engagement with those staff.
So the department is willing to apply this presumption to entry?
Yes. As written here, as I'm reading, and I know that the board is looking at, after a maximum of 30 days in the ESH entry unit, that there's a presumption
Yep.
that a movement to less restrictive housing, if there isn't any infraction or, for us, credible intel, that would point towards kind of, participating in or organizing kind of one of those violent actions.
You didn't read what was in front of you right now,
Oh, I'm sorry,
Jeff.
no.
So I just
here.
want to be clear on the language.
After a maximum of 30 days in the ESH entry unit, a young adult shall advance to a less restrictive housing unit unless he has been placed in the ESH entry unit more than once. He is engaged in disruptive, violent, or aggressive behavior while in ESH entry unit or there is credible intelligence that he may engage in additional violence in an ESH level 2 or, then it cuts out. You may have, or secure unit.
I just wanted to point out what I know I've said before, but if the entry unit is truly an assessment unit and you need 30 days to do it, then it shouldn't matter about this additional information. That would be information that would be the basis that they go into level 1, and they continue to have all the same restrictions. So I don't know why you'd keep them in the entry unit if it's strictly for an assessment.
So
You
you
see
know
what
what?
I'm saying? Because the assessment takes 30 days. So even if any of these occur, that would be a basis to consider. Let's say you were going to move them to level 2. No, I'm not going to send them to level 2. I'm going to send them to level 1. But I also wonder, and this is where, forgive me for going back to the 18-year-olds, but because you have no other place more restrictive right now today, to put 18-year-olds, and that's where a lot of the violence is coming from, is the 18-year-olds in secure and enhanced supervision. They're going back and forth like this. If you had today a level 1 that was operational for 18-year-olds, then you wouldn't even need the entry unit because you wouldn't need this provision because you'd have entry unit for all young adults, 30 days, and then you move on to either level 1, which is the exact same restrictions.
But
So
let me
this
just
doesn't
interject
make
to your
sense
point.
me.
That's what I'm challenged by, because what this is suggesting is not just to level 2 or level 3 as written. It suggests that maybe you can move to level 1, right? I mean, let me say it differently. But that's not less restrictive. So what I presume when I read this is that you're talking about going to level 2 or 3 because level 1 is not lesser restrictive
what you're saying.
than the
Okay.
entry. That's part of my problem.
But then why doesn't, what should be added is that there's the presumption that after 30 days you move to
Movement out of entry.
Level 1, 2, or 3, and if these 3, if they don't have any of these,
Right.
then the
That I
presumption
take
is
no
level
issue
2 or
with.
3.
That I take no
That's
issue with.
fine.
But as
So
written,
we're saying the same thing.
right, as written,
You have
it
to
is,
have that.
as written, it's suggesting that you're moving from entry to level 2 or 3,
Right.
which contradicts your earlier points about assessment and what you learned about level 1. So if we can modify the condition,
So currently, people do move from entry to level 1. I think what Stanley and Jeff have been discussing is that young adults will not move to level 1. They will not go from 30 days in a restraint desk to 45 days in a restraint desk unless these issues occur. They will move after 30 days to an area where there is not a restraint desk, so level 2, which is what Stanley and Jeff have been working on. So there is the presumption of movement unless these things happen, but there's also the presumption of movement to a less restrictive environment.
Well, then I think
So
what you
not
could do
level
is
1.
just
We need to
amend it to
clarify.
say, I think this might solve the problem, because you and I are speaking the same issue. After a maximum of 30 days, an enhanced restraint unit, a young adult shall advance to level 1 unless will be advanced to level 1 if, and then it's if any one of these 3 occur, and
Right.
otherwise he would move to level 2 or 3.
exactly.
That's really what, yeah. So they're not held in entry and then can go to level 1 later.
Does that work? What
think
we're
I was
saying
trying to
is
follow
that,
it,
what
but
we're
I
saying
have
is that if it takes 28 to 30 days to make an assessment, that assessment should be completed in the 30 days in entry. And then the department should make a decision and should move that individual to level 1, to level 2, or level 3. So we do not want a person sitting in entry for longer than 30 days. It's number one. And what we're also saying is that that person should only remain in level 1 if any one of these 3 conditions are met. Otherwise, that person is moving to level 2 or level 3.
Yes.
Does that work?
Yes.
You got that?
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
that makes sense.
So there's the language.
We've got a vote? Second?
So. All right. Yeah.
I'll support that.
Supported.
Yeah.
That's exactly what's looking at that.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Stanley said yes.
We have,
There was one more issue on the look back. The last condition to be considered is where the department is permitted to consider a young adult's activity occurring or actions committed at a time prior to the incident. Such activity or actions must have occurred within the preceding year.
The department would like to, we're fine, minimizing the look-back period for the young adults, but we would ask for 2 years, just because we're not considering just the 18-year-olds, it's going all the way to the 21-year-olds.
well, what's the distinction between, I don't get that, if it's 1 year or 2, and
So
just because of the age difference? I don't really get that.
Statistically, right now, you don't have a lot of incidents within the 16 and 17-year-olds. You do start to see it in the 18-year-olds. So more incidents are then related to 18, 19, 20, and 21-year-olds. So when you're looking back on a 1 year for an 18 or 19-year-old, it makes perfect sense. It's not going to be a lot in a 16 and 17-year-old. If they do participate in gang activity or slashing or other thing, take that into consideration, but most people aren't involved. Once you get to 21-year-olds, looking back 2 years is more significant because they have more of a history after they turn 18 and 19, just as Judge Hamill has said. There's more violence and more participation in the gangs, more kind of possible like long-term engagement within those and then following kind of violent orders.
So wouldn't the 1 year look back capture what might have occurred even in the second year? I mean,
So I'm asking for the 2-year look back because I do believe that.
I understand, but if you have a 1 year look back, why is that not sufficient? Wouldn't that, a 1 year capture whatever might have been in the second year anyway, if you could have considered it?
Participating in gang activities, kind of leave the custody for a while, and we don't have anything that's relevant to what they did while they were in terms of their participation in gang assaults and organizing gang activities. I know it doesn't seem like a very big distinction for us, though, in terms of looking back at participation within kind of the organizations. I'll let the chief know.
As a psychologist, our mantra is always, past behavior is best predictor of future behavior. So you always want to look at as much information as possible. So if you have a 2-year window, I'm in support of a 2-year window. You have an offender who may get released in 6 months, but has spent time prior with you for 2 years, I would want to see what they were like those 2 years prior. So I would go with as much information. If it was up to me, I'd go back as far as possible. But 2 years I'm fine with. Because best predictor, really, you want to look to see how this person functioned in this environment. That's how I see it as a mental health professional. That's how you're going to, 1 year, restricting to 1 year is really limiting the principles of doing a really good forensic evaluation on somebody.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of a look back at all, actually. I'm like current behavior, how people show up. But Bobby, where do you stand? He's asking for 2 year.
I think 1 year is fine. I mean, it may be true, that it goes back as far as possible, but that's what we're trying to establish something different here, which is that people moved out of these units based upon their behavior then. They cannot do anything about what happened.
And we have a 3-month, we're going with a 3-month variance. Jeff, if we went with 1 year look back, we're going with a 3-month variance. Is there something that you could be able to come back to us and say, I need the 2-year window because, like, is there, a year, 2 years?
So,
Let me just to clarify something, you're just talking about looking back and just reviewing this information, right? I mean,
Yeah.
But they're keeping them in the unit, not allowing them to move from 1 to 2 based upon something that happened 5 years before.
wait, say that again, Bobby?
We're going into the unit based upon something that happened 5 years before.
So,
Well, I mean, the whole idea is that there's a concern that they're presenting imminent risk to the safety and security of the facility. You know, once you're more than a year, even for a 20, 21-year-old, it's really hard to say it's imminent risk at this point. So I think 1 year is, I mean, Stanley would prefer none, but I think 1 year is reasonable for this age cohort.
Yeah. We're talking 90 days, and again, this ought to be taken up in the rules.
But right now they have 5 years.
I know. Yeah, that's why I'm like, I wouldn't want any look back.
I just want to note on the record that Stanley Richards is now chairing the meeting
so,
in addition to
yeah,
participating.
okay, sorry.
Maybe. Yes, Jeff.
We'll be fine with a year.
Thank you. So let's.
By the way, I was confused about one thing, because, and I think Stanley and I have talked about this.
Yep.
There is an immediate event, particularly in Secure, and they have a history. Then we want to take a look at kind of what that is. Just placement on history alone with the young adults. That's what you're discussing. I was confused. I was focused much more on just the idea of the in addition to. Sorry? I'm sorry. In either case, I'm fine with a year.
Okay. So we need to. So a motion. It's been moved. Second. Vote.
This is for the 1 year?
This is for the 1 year.
In favor?
Jenna?
Yes, sir.
Aye. All in favor? The 1 year, the department is permitted to consider young adults' activity occurring or actions committed at a time prior to the incident. Such activity or actions must have occurred within the preceding year. So that's been approved.
So those are all the conditions that we've been considering. So
Yes.
now you can move to vote on the entire variance with those conditions that have been approved attached.
Okay. So do we have a motion for the variance?
Moved.
Second? No second?
second.
Steve? In favor?
I'm voting against it because of the shackling and shaming of the kids for 30 to 60 days in entry in level 1. So I don't find the department complies with its own policies nor our standards based on essentially the stated assessment made by our own staff, which I feel compelled to accept. So I feel constrained at this point that I have to vote against it.
I'm voting against it because of the shackling as well as the management failures in this unit.
Gerard?
Favor?
Jennifer?
In favor, Martha has to go and get Derek and get his vote.
She's going to get Derek's vote. He's outside taking a call. And once we do this, we have one more DOC variance and then 2 H&H variances. Thank you for your patience.
Did we just do the H&H, the variances? While we're waiting, is it possible to?
Yeah.
Just to do the
Is H&H ready to present their variance?
They're the standard variances, right, on,
We're going to let H&H present their variance while Martha goes and gets. The mic? The Is it on?
I think the variance requests speak for themselves, that we don't really, and they're long-standing requests, some of them going back a dozen years. Do you want an explanation for each of the variances, or can
No.
we just ask that the variance renewals be approved? There are three of them, actually.
Three.
Quantiferon testing, psychotropic medication, and injury information transmittal to DOC. We request that they be renewed.
Any comments, questions? Motion? Second?
So we got to do one at a time, right?
Yes.
Yes, second.
Ms. Jennifer, voting on the H
Oh,
and
wait,
H.
it's moved and seconded, so now we're taking a vote.
Yes.
Quantiferon.
On the quantifier.
In favor?
In favor? Steve?
Yeah.
Favor? Gerard? All in favor? Going to the next variance.
This is psychotropic medication.
Psychotropic.
Thank you.
Motion. Steve, while you're here, on psychotropics, variance. The psychotropic medications.
So allow 2
28
weeks,
days
allow 4 weeks rather
for,
than 2 weeks,
for
right?
stable patients and general
Stable patients.
population.
Yeah. In favor? Jennifer?
In favor?
Favor.
All? And
Finally, the injury information
injury
variance.
information. Motion?
Second.
Jennifer?
In favor?
In favor. Favor.
In favor? Approved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where did Martha go? Call the meeting to order. Good afternoon, everyone. So we need to complete the vote on ESH with the approved conditions. So Dirk, we need your vote for the record.
I vote in favor.
Okay. So the ESH passes with the conditions, 3-month variance. We want to continue the secure, right, we need to continue to secure variance with the conditions 1 day past our September meeting. So I need a motion. Second. Derek?
I'm in favor.
Okay, Jennifer? In favor. Gerard? Barbara? In favor. It passes. Now we're going to go, thank you, Derek. We're good? Okay. We're going to continue with public comment. Calling back up Al, Greg, Catlin, Victoria, and then Grace. Al is coming up. Been one of those days, Al.
Come here today, I'm gonna read this thing, very quick. I come here today once again to ask for your help. Almost 2 years ago, these meetings were held in a small room, uncomfortable chairs, folding tables, and we could look each other in the eye. Since that time, So while this might angle or offend you, this is nothing compared to what we have to endure. Some of you will say you will not be bullied by color. If you believe that we are bullying you, you should be here. This is not us bullying you. This is us asking for help over and over again. And really, we had these meetings, and I thought they would be fruitful. We were told, we meet again, we were told that, because I want the advocates to understand something. What we're asking for is this thing. The programming issue, the
Caitlin? Caitlin. Thank you. Victoria? Oh, good, brother.
Can we receive from the department at that meeting, something I've asked them before, which is sort of a status in terms of investigators and attorneys in the investigation department, and the status of the leadership of that department as well? How many positions are filled and how many are open? Thank you.
Yes. Hey, Victoria. Is the mic on?
Oh, I work at the Urban Justice Center Mental Health Project, and I am a member of the Jails Action Coalition, and I sit on the advisory board for DOC, Adolescent and Young Adults. I say all that to say I'm speaking for me today, and I want to address a few things quickly. And I just want to start off by reminding the board and everyone in this room that the people incarcerated in Rikers or off Rikers in New York City Department of Correction have not been convicted of their crimes. The majority of people have not been convicted of their crimes. And at no time is Rikers a prison. It's a jail. And also, as far as the look-backs, I don't think that should have even been considered a vote, because if you're talking about people that have not even been convicted of their alleged crimes, what are you looking back at? This is America. Let's not forget where we are. And with Jeff used an example of 18-year-olds needing time to look back for 2 years, New York just passed raise the age. So once again, what are we doing? We're doing votes that make no sense, and we're wasting time and taking away from time that's supposed to be allocated to things that we're supposed to be changing. I would also like to address the issue of 61% of the people in ESH were receiving mental health services before placement. To me, everyone in this room should be disturbed by those numbers. And we're talking about 61% of the people in ESH, yet we're talking about shackling them. We're not worrying about how they decompensate. We're talking about keeping people held down for complete hours. Majority of you sitting up here on this table cannot even sit at this table throughout the duration of the meeting. So can you imagine somebody who is medicated,
diagnosed with mental health illnesses and having to sit through these hours, or having side effects from the medication, needing to go to the bathroom. There are many things not taken into consideration. And I'm appalled by the majority of you carrying the title doctors making these votes against people. And I'm disgusted by the actual MD who left today, who actually put this vote through. He runs the head of hospitals, and yes, I'm going on the record saying that. He runs the head of hospitals, and he yet voted to chain adolescents and young adults. That's a problem. 90%, 96% of the people, no contact, yet DOC continually says they are all for lowering the recidivism rate. How are we going to lower the recidivism rate if we do not allow people to connect with their outside sources and their support system? That's unacceptable. For over a decade before even coming into working in criminal justice system, I worked in hospitals, the ER, psych ward, CPEP, TBI units, even worked in Bellevue and Amherst. And at no time were patients supposed to be restrained more than 2 hours. Now, I don't know how you all educated people overlook that simple fact. That's a medical protocol. And yet, when somebody's incarcerated, those medical needs are overlooked. Jeff said only 17 were in the unit. Only is a slap in the face. As a mother, I think of only 17 people. If my son is one of those 17 people, he means the world to me. And what value do you put on a life? So when you say only, everybody here is getting ready to take vacation next month, right? Those 17 people's lives will still be affected. Everybody here worries, 6 months, no time, we'll come back, we'll address it, we'll make the rules and stuff. Within those 6 months, people die, people get hurt. People go into intake and be dead within 3 days. And this is in our system that we're discussing. So when you say 3 months or 6 months, y'all didn't even really think about what y'all saying. These are human beings, these are human lives. And it only take a second for injustice to occur and that life to be ended. And they said they sending people to units regardless of classification. They talk about intel. Officer Cobra handed me this book today. Cobra always like to discuss things that occur, right, when it's against their people. But I worked on the island, and I always tell y'all this. I'm really pissed off, and I'm really starting to consider to even publish my journals, because for every incident that I hear the officers talk about, my brain, and thank God after my brain surgery, I have these memories still. My brain recalls an incident that I've seen an officer abuse an incarcerated individual. A lot of these people do incidents behind the wall, behind orders from officers. Everybody likes to overlook the fact when I bring up a lot of officers are gang members, but it's occurred. Nothing is still being done about it. You talk about intel, why intel is not going after their OG officers that are Bloods or Crips or Trinitarians. You talk about intel, little old me, having worked on the island in 2-3 years, I keep my ear to the floor and I have connections everywhere. I reached out to a deputy commissioner just last month to talk about somebody who was in a house. He was 60 years old, placed in a Trinitarian house, and there was supposed to be some violence placed on him. So I emailed DOC. I take offense to the Cobra man he left, but I take offense to him coming up here saying advocates do not care about the officers, because when I sent the email to inform to the deputy commissioner about what could possibly occur, it included this needs to be taken care of for the safety of all. And that meant the officers and everybody included in those buildings. Nobody wants to see anybody get hurt, but I want you to really think about the value of life and the value of your positions on this board, because we take too many things lightly, and at the end of the day, we are all human beings, and we are all in America, and we are all entitled to justice. Justice is not supposed to be just an illusion that my parents fought for. Justice is not supposed to be something that is not obtainable. We are all here, and we're supposed to all be helping each other. And I'm gonna put you on blast, Stanley. You need to step up, because I feel like yes, you want to help and walk a middle ground, but at the same time, DOC lies, and they tell you a lot of things, and then they come back and they don't even follow through. And all of y'all need to step up. All of Dr. Cohn, I always thank you, and I'll thank you again. Your counterpart, I can't really thank you. I need to see more action from you. You need, and you need to leave your prison training behind and really realize that you're working with the jail system now. And I just want y'all all to really think about the whole thing of do no harm. That's more than just a word. That's a lifestyle. That's a commitment. When you take these seats on this board, you commit to do no harm. You commit to looking out for the citizens of New York City. You commit to looking out for the officers that work in the New York City Department of Corrections. You commit to humanity. Peace and blessings. Have a great day.
Thank you. Last speaker, Grace. you, Grace. Thank you, Grace. Who? Clara? Oh, thank you.
Was she ever offered a chance to go to Manhattan House? Did the medical staff ask her if she wanted to? She asked if she thought she was at risk for sexual violence. Was that a question? No. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes today's meeting. Thank you, everybody.